The Tower of Malevolence, also known as the Harbinger of Disaster, suddenly appeared around the world. Numerous monsters emerged from the tower, plunging humanity into a state of hopelessness as these creatures brought mankind to the brink of extinction. Just when all seemed lost, the first generation of Awakeners appeared. Known as the Founders, they managed to suppress the monsters and eventually conquer and destroy the tower. This victory marked humanity's first triumph against the invasion from another dimension. The Founders were hailed as heroes, and their legacies are commemorated at the Mausoleum of the Founders. A century later, our protagonist, Kannagi Minato, enjoys reading about their legends, which are available in the library. He reads about the great swordsman who, with a mere wooden stick from a tree branch, managed to cut down a 10,000-strong army, and the wise wizard who could chant any magic without incantation. In the current era, these tales are regarded as mere legends or fairy tales. Despite this, Kannagi dreams of marking his name in history, just like the Founders. He knows he possesses the Seal of the Chosen Ones. A crest has appeared on his body. With that crest, he pledges to make his name as an Awakened, just as the Founders did. Tragically, while his classmates cheer for passing their qualification test, Kannagi remains silent, staring at his phone, which shows that he failed the Hunter's qualification test. In tears, he watches everyone celebrate around him. His classmates tease him, saying they will go to the party to celebrate their admission and ask him to clean some trash. As an Awakened, he knows that writing down their name guarantees passing the test. But he has failed for 3 years in a row and is mocked as a disgrace. This was his last chance to take the test, and he now believes he can never become a hunter. He picks up the trash in the classroom, sadly reflecting that despite getting a full score on the written test and training his aura, his crest seems useless, more like a scar than a blessing. With tears in his eyes, holding a trash can, he shouts that he also wants to be like the Founders. Suddenly, a man calls his name, telling him to hurry to the school gate. Startled, he stutteringly replies that he completely forgot. Sighing, he thinks that if possible, he wants to be idolized and cheered on like the Founders. At the gate, the students are talking about the man standing before them. Izaki Kaise, an rank hunter, smiles apologetically to everyone for causing the commotion. Meanwhile, Hizaki's minions shout at him, saying he's late and making Hizaki wait, to which he stutteringly apologizes. Hizaki walks over to his minions, telling them to stop, and asks if he was right that it wasn't like he was bullying the weak. One of his minions tries to explain, but Hizaki, with a creepy smile, asks if they saw the reporters behind him. His minions quickly apologize. One of the reporters then tells Hizaki that they are looking forward to the documentary, and shows Hizaki his picture, saying they would like to use it as the cover. The reporter explains that it was taken at the moment he defeated a dragon with a single slash of his sword, and asks Hizaki what he thinks about it. Hizaki replies that it's a really good picture but a bit embarrassing. Kannagi and Hizaki enrolled in the academy together 3 years ago. Hizaki was a genius who scored at the top of the class in every subject. During their time together, Hizaki has been bullying Kannagi. Kannagi can't believe he needs to spend an entire day with Hizaki during the documentary, making him wonder why Hizaki wants him there. The reporter asks Hizaki who the person behind him is. Hizaki replies that he wants to introduce someone from the same academy generation, but then whisperingly asks one of his minions what his name is again. The minion replies, Kannagi Minato, which Hizaki then tells the reporter. Hizaki adds that although Kanaga's grades aren't great, he always asks Hizaki for favors, leaving him with almost no time for his training. He also claims that he gives Kannagi advice and guidance, leaving Kannagi stunned and confused. Kannagi is even more surprised when Hizaki tells the reporters that Kannagi sometimes asks for financial support. Kannagi knows this is bullshit because, while Hizaki always took his money, Kannagi never asked for anything from him. He had never experienced such a pathetic year in his life before. The reporter, amazed by Hizaki's story, tells Hizaki that he is the embodiment of perfection. Hizaki then grabs Kannagi, shouting to the reporters to look forward to it because he will be an Awakened who will write history. The reporter then shouts to Kannagi, saying he must be happy to receive Hizaki's kindness and asks if he has any words for his benefactor. Kannagi is about to respond that there is no way he would do it, but Hizaki whispers to him that he failed the test and is completely worthless, so they should settle this peacefully. Hizaki squeezes Kanaga's shoulder tightly, making him remember the bullying. Smiling in fear, Kannagi tells the reporter that he is completely grateful for everything Hizaki has done for him and that there are no words to describe his gratitude. After that, Hizaki walks forward, leaving Kannagi behind, and tells the reporter that since they don't have much time, they should move on to the next topic. Hizaki points to his trophies, leaving Kannagi shaking in fear. Kannagi hears someone behind him questioning if they really need his name in the article, but one of the reporters responds that they don't because no one would be interested anyway. Kannagi realizes that even if someone is evil, as long as they have the power to become a hunter, everyone would be on their side and their name would be remembered. He tries to stop the tears in his eyes while stutteringly saying his name. Suddenly, someone shouts his name, shocking him. He sees Hizaki and his minions walking closer, with Hizaki telling him to come to the mausoleum of the founders after school. Kannagi asks why and wonders what is happening and what will happen after, but Hizaki just smiles and asks if he wants to take a re-examination, confusing Kannagi even more. Hizaki tells him that he will talk to the association. When Kannagi asks why Hizaki is doing this, Hizaki responds that it's a way to increase his popularity, and the last scene of the documentary is set at the mausoleum, so they need to film there and discuss it afterwards. Hizaki then warns him that he must come. Kannagi wonders if this is real but thinks that even though he hates the idea of being used by Hizaki to increase his popularity, it's another chance for him regardless of the situation. He smiles, swearing that this time, he will pass for sure. Later, in the Mausoleum of the Founders, the reporter captures footage of Hizaki, saying, "At the Mausoleum of the Founders, a single top-class hunter pledges to protect humanity's future, and this moment is truly picture perfect." After that, the reporters tell Hizaki they managed to take a good picture and thank him for his time during his busy day. Hizaki replies that he looks forward to the article. Once the reporters leave, Hizaki moves further into the mausoleum. When he arrives where his minions are waiting, he asks if they have found the entry point. His minions excitedly reply that they have and point to a secret pathway, asking if it is the one they were looking for. Suddenly, someone asks from behind what they are doing. Hizaki nonchalantly asks if he hasn't figured it out yet, and tells him it's a treasure hunt. Kannagi angrily shouts at Hizaki, calling him a grave bandit and asking if he even understands who is resting in that place. Hizaki responds that of course he knows, but then he kicks one of the founders' statues and asks if he's right that it's only the rotten bodies of the past. He explains that they couldn't let the chance slip away to become millionaires and dismisses the importance of the founders' remains, saying they are just dead bodies and don't matter. Kannagi acknowledges that the founders were amazing, which is why he wants to be like them, an awakened whose name is marked in history. Enraged, Kannagi rushes to attack Hizaki, calling him a bastard. However, Hizaki sidesteps swiftly and punches him hard in the stomach, making him cough up blood. He collapses to the ground, clutching his stomach in pain, while Hizaki berates him for daring to attack. Hizaki continues to assault him, making him think he might die. But then one of Hizaki's minions calls out, saying they've found something and shows a lot of valuable items, which shocks him. Hizaki grabs a circular crystal and excitedly asks if the aura is emitting from the item itself. Hizaki shouts that it's wonderful and that with it, he could live without needing to work for the rest of his life. Kannagi tries to stop them, shouting not to touch it, but his voice fails to come out. Hizaki then grabs him by the shirt and says he'll explain it as simply as possible so a failure like him can understand. Hizaki reveals that he had been looking for a weakling like him all along, having tricked him with the promise of a re-examination. He knew about Kannagi visiting the library all the time and found it amusing. Finally, Hizaki declares he has found a useful pawn. Hizaki then drags him outside, smilingly shouting that he dreamed of becoming a hunter, so he finally decided to steal the treasures of the mausoleum and go missing, which is a tragic story. Kannagi stutteringly tells Hizaki to stop the bullshit, but Hizaki continues, saying it will be tomorrow's top news. Hizaki then lifts him over a cliff, telling him that after robbing the mausoleum of the founders and escaping from the police, the culprit will be a third-year hunter from the training academy. Hizaki then lets go of him and mockingly asks for his name again. Kannagi looks at Hizaki in anger and fear, but Hizaki tells him that knowing his name doesn't matter now and says goodbye. Kannagi falls into the river, wondering if this is how he will die after all the training and tests. He thinks everything was meaningless because he is fading away without being remembered by anyone. Suddenly, lights appear around him and many figures surround him. He hears them saying that he will be their vessel and grant their wish. The figures introduce themselves as the heroic spirits sealed in that place, the very souls of the founders. Shocked, he wonders what this means, hearing voices and seeing lights from the founders. One of the founders tells him that the crest on his hand is the crest of nothingness. It doesn't possess any power by itself, but it can manifest any power he could have never imagined. The voice tells him to choose one of them and form a contract because they are the pinnacle of every art: magic, endurance, swordsmanship, spearmanship, summoning magic, alchemy, and more. Whoever he chooses, he will gain power from that benefactor. The voice asks him whose power he seeks. He initially thinks of wanting power like Hizaki's but changes his mind. He responds that he wants a power incomparable in the world, a power to overwhelm everything and wipe away all the humiliations he endured. Another voice then tells him to decide whom he chooses. Kannagi replies that he wants everything and all of their powers, they should give him everything. The founders consider him greedy, thinking it's impossible, as no matter how strong the vessel is, taking everything would be a mess. But Kannagi absorbs them all, shouting at them to shut up and, instead of yapping their mouths, to enter him. Kannagi pushes himself to absorb all the heroic spirits, causing mixed reactions among the founders. Some panic, some are amazed, others don't care, and some wonder who he is. Eventually, he absorbs all of them. From atop the hill, Hizaki looks back when he sees a light emerging from the river. Suddenly, the river rises as if something exploded beneath it, making everyone turn and wonder what is happening. Kannagi then flies out of the river, landing on the hill in front of Hizaki and his minions with different hair and eye colors. One of Hizaki's minions sneers, saying Kannagi crawled back like a tenacious roach. Kannagi breaks a small branch off a long branch and swings it at Hizaki's minions, who are shocked and ask what the hell he is doing. Hizaki's minions then teasingly laugh at him, asking if he really intends to fight them with a stick. Kannagi continues to swing his stick, prompting Hizaki to sigh and tell his minions to end it, ensuring Kannagi doesn't crawl back again. Hizaki orders his minions to cut Kannagi's head off. One of the minions grabs his sword and arrogantly replies to Hizaki that he understands. He taunts Kannagi, saying that based on the recent exam, his sword aura is a rank and he has mastered the way of the swordsman. He tells Kannagi to be grateful to be cut down by him. Kannagi simply responds, mastering the way of the swordsman. The man then jumps towards Kannagi, slashing at him with his sword. Smiling, the man stops behind him, but then blood begins to pour from all over his body and head as if he had been slashed. The man screams in pain, while Hizaki and the other minion look on in shock, unable to believe what they are seeing. Kannagi then tells the man that he has mastered the way of the swordsman and asks him what kind of swordsmanship he uses. The other minion casts a spell, calling upon the green cradle and the gaze of destruction. Kannagi points his finger at the minion and tells him that he is slow. He then attacks the minion with a spell, Thunderbolt Haddad, without any incantation. The minion cannot believe it, and a powerful thunderbolt strikes him, electrocuting him to death. Hizaki cannot believe that Kannagi cut down his minion with nothing but a mere branch and cast magic without any incantation. Hizaki recalls the legend of a great swordsman who, long ago, cut down a 10,000-strong army with only a single wooden stick, and a wizard who could chant any magic without incantation. In the current era, these stories are considered mere legends or fairy tales. Now, the souls of the Awakeners that slumbered in the mausoleum of the founders dwell within Kannagi Minato. There are 106 souls inside his body. Kannagi remembers Hizaki telling everyone that he would mark his name in history as an awakened. He walks closer to Hizaki, declaring that his name shall not be forgotten and that he shall be remembered eternally, including the new myth about him. Kannagi stops approaching Hizaki, unable to believe that he managed to absorb the souls of the founders with his crest of nothingness. He hears the founders inside him, content and excited, marveling at the spaciousness of their new home. They ask how many centuries it has been since they were freed from boredom. Kannagi smiles, feeling the founders' happiness. He had memorized their legends for a long time, and now their souls are inside him. However, the founders decide it will be a race to see who gets to control his body. The great swordsman, Hinoki Reikaru, calls to Kannagi, surprising him. Hinoki remarks that it is expected to be remembered after such a long time. He asks Kannagi what he plans to do. Kannagi asks if he means dealing with Hizaki, but Hinoki dismisses Hizaki as trash and points behind him, asking what Kannagi will do about that. Shocked, Kannagi walks closer to Hizaki, who stutteringly tells him to stay away, and not to look down on a rank hunter like him. Kannagi punches Hizaki in the face, sending him spinning in midair from the force. Kannagi then faces the bag that is releasing a dark aura and tells Hizaki to get out of the way. He focuses on the bag, and suddenly, a strong power emanates from it, surprising him. Hinoki, however, smiles calmly. Meanwhile, in the city, a Cerberus is attacking everything in its path. A man shouts to Kisaragi to handle it. Kisaragi faces the beast, and when it lunges at him, he jumps above it and attacks with a waterfall impact from above. The people cheer in amazement, shouting that Kisaragi instantly killed an A-rank monster. The S-rank hunter, Kisaragi, thanks them for their compliments and asks where Hizaki is. The man tells Kisaragi that because of an interview, it must be nice to be called a young hope. But Kisaragi tells the man not to say it like that. If Hizaki becomes more popular, their guild's reputation will also rise. They decide to get a drink after filing a report when they hear a strong growl and feel intense pressure. Everyone panics, wondering if it is a demon. Kisaragi looked back when he heard his team in pain and saw normal people collapsing and hunters struggling because of the pressure. He noticed that A-rank and B-rank hunters couldn't stand against it, indicating it was an S-rank monster, so Kisaragi immediately made a call. Meanwhile, on the street, people passed out due to the pressure, which was coming from the mausoleum of the founders. Hizaki, shakingly sitting up, was surprised to see a huge monster emerging from the bag in front of them. He asked if it was a demon and what the hell it was. Kannagi replied that it was because Hizaki had opened the mausoleum, releasing one of the boss monsters from the tower that was sealed there. The seal was undone when Hizaki took the items away. Inoki confirmed this, explaining that some demons from the tower survived by hiding and becoming dormant. He identified the demon as the embodiment of emptiness, a stacked-eyed tiger estimated to be above S rank in danger level. Hizaki tried to stand up, shaking, while Hinoki explained that the stacked-eyed tiger is a living disaster that kills numerous humans within a few kilometers with its poisonous aura. This demon was quite common during their era, but now it was overwhelmingly powerful for the youngsters of this era. Panicking, Hizaki ran away, shouting that he needed to escape or else he would be killed. Kannagi warned Hizaki that it was better not to move, as the tiger targets moving objects. The stacked-eyed tiger saw Hizaki running and immediately lashed out with one of its tentacles. Hizaki, covering himself with his sword and shouting at the demon to stay away, was helpless as the tentacle pierced his chest. Despite having slain a dragon with his sword before, Hizaki couldn't stop the demon from spreading its tentacles inside his body. The stacked-eyed tiger began to absorb Hizaki, making him scream in pain. Kannagi simply told him that he had warned him. Hinoki then wrapped his hand around Kannagi and asked if he would give his body to him completely. Hinoki then asked if Kannagi wanted to see the founder Hinoki's one-handed sword style, thinking he would take the vessel while the others were distracted. Kannagi responded that he didn't mind lending his body, to which Hinoki excitedly agreed. However, another founder grabbed Hinoki and accused him of trying to run away with such a strong vessel, claiming it for themselves. Realizing he had been noticed, Hinoki tried to calm everyone down. They all stopped when Kannagi told them he had one condition: he would only lend his body to everyone. This confused them. Kannagi tells the founders that he will definitely surpass all of them and, in time, reach the same heights they did. He also wants to see how strong he will become. He then challenges them to show him what they've got. Hinoki wonders what Kanaga's deal is, thinking he's insane while drawing his sword. Hinoki then takes control of Kanaga's body and shouts to the other founders that they should join in. He slashes the demon with the stick, aided by Hinoki, severing one of the demon's arms. The demon launches its other arm to attack, but Kannagi, while looking at the chopped stick in his hand, manages to dodge as another founder possesses his body. He then uses his hand to cut the demon's arm, shocking the demon. Kannagi grabs a huge stick from the ground, and the spearman founder possesses his body, using the stick as a spear to attack the demon. Another founder then possesses him, allowing him to easily dodge the demon's attacks. The old founder takes over, enabling Kannagi to grab the demon's tentacle and slam it into the ground with immense force. The demon is flung into the air, and Kannagi grabs the bag. The archer founder possesses him, and he aims and successfully hits the demon in the head. It screams in pain as its blood spreads around. Kannagi wipes his face and continuously attacks the demon in different ways as the founders possess his body one by one. Hinoki then takes control again and grabs Hizaki's broken sword from the ground. The demon attempts a surprise underground attack, but Kanaga's eyes turn yellow as the great wizard possesses him and electrocutes the demon. He then jumps, and when he is above it, Hinoki uses his one-handed sword style, Gekurautachi wave-cutting blade, to slash the demon in half, killing it. Kannagi smiles victoriously. Meanwhile, a raven perched on a tree watches everything that just happened. In the city, a man floating in midair answers his phone, incredulous that the demon was already defeated when he was just about to head over there. He asks if there are any strong hunters nearby. The person on the other line responds that, based on footage from the Raven, it was a student of the academy. The man, surprised, acknowledges this. The world's strongest awakened, Ikehara Midori, then tells the person on the other line that he wants to meet that student. The next morning, Ikehara is sitting on a pile of dead monsters, calling the director and informing him about the S-rank demon. The director asks if Ikehara defeated it, but he replies that it was not him. Based on footage from his Raven, it was Kannagi Minato who defeated it. Ikehara mentions that Kannagi failed the hunter's examination 3 years in a row, which makes it hard for him to believe. He then asks the director if he could do him a favor. Meanwhile, at the academy, students are asking each other if they were okay yesterday because the aura was so awful that they couldn't move. One student jokes with his friend, asking what he would do if he told him that it was actually him who killed the monster. The friend dismisses it as impossible, noting that it has been 10 years since the last emergence of an S-rank hunter. However, the friend reminds him of a rumor that the one who defeated the monster was actually a student from the academy. Kannagi walking with a stick to support his shaking, while the other student dismisses the idea, thinking no hunter could defeat that demon, and if there were such a person, he wouldn't be in their academy. Kannagi is amazed that the only topic of conversation today is yesterday's incident. Suddenly, a man bumps him aside, telling him he's in the way. Kannagi falls to the floor, and the man thinks there is no way such a loser could be the S-rank slayer while looking at him. Kannagi knows he defeated the demon yesterday, but it was because he lent his body to the founders. Now, his body is painfully torn apart as the recoil. Someone then laughingly asks him if he is completely okay with it, and when he looks up, he sees it as Hinoki. Hinoki tells him to get a grip and asks if he wanted to surpass them. Kannagi remembers saying it last night and confidently responds that he did. He pushes himself to stand up while Hinoki laughingly tells him to show his guts. Hinoki looks at the students and notices that the level of the Awakeners in this era is too low, more or less the same as normal humans, which he considers trash. Hinoki also thinks that if the tower were to emerge right at that moment, the world would surely end. But then Hinoki is surprised to sense someone with a strong aura. Kannagi asks Hinoki what is wrong, but Hinoki replies it's nothing, though he thinks that just now he felt a tremendous aura. Suddenly, a professor shouted for Kannagi to hurry up and come over. Apologizing, Kannagi asked if it was his letter of resignation, knowing that he had only 3 chances to take the test and that the hunter's qualification test can only be taken from the training academy, meaning he would need to start over from the general admission slot. However, the professor told him to go to the field immediately because it was his re-examination, which surprised him. A moment later, the students watched from the window, wondering if there had ever been a hunter re-examination test before, but no one knew. Meanwhile, in the field, Kanaga's mission was a 100-meter sprint, with an average time of 3.6 seconds and a best record of 2.7 seconds. He knew he was not in perfect condition but needed to give his best. The man who had pushed him earlier told the students that Kannagi was famous for being a failure even in the teacher's office, and that giving him a chance after 3 years of failure was just sympathy. However, when Kannagi began to run, everyone was shocked when he completed it in 1.2 seconds. In the next test, his mission was to complete a 3,000-meter sprint with an average time of 4 minutes and 20 seconds and a best record of 3 minutes and 17 seconds. To everyone's astonishment, he finished it in 1 minute and 17 seconds. The next test was push-ups in 2 minutes, with an average of 215 push-ups and a best record of 418 push-ups, but he managed 840 push-ups. The next test was the bench press, with an average weight of 4,000 kilograms and a best record of 620 kilograms, yet he lifted 1,280 kilograms. The students were shocked and asked what he was because he beat all the best records by more than double, and the ladies thought he was cool. Kannagi wondered if the founders were still lending him with their powers, but Hinoki knew they wouldn't help with something like this and that they hadn't done anything. Meanwhile, in the headmaster's office, the headmaster gave Ikehara all the current records of Kannagi Minato. Ikehara thanked the headmaster and was amazed at Kannagi's records. The headmaster told Ikehara that when he heard about the request for re-examination, he thought something was wrong. Even though Kanaga's physical abilities are amazing, the real issue is his magic capacity because, in all the tests over the past 3 years, Kanaga's capacity was immeasurable, and he essentially had no mana, so the headmaster thought it would be a waste of their attention. Ikehara's secretary commented that this was what they expected of Kannagi, but Ikehara just laughed and said they would see about it. Meanwhile, in the field, he was taking the magic measurement test. The professor asked if he understood how the measurement worked and explained that he had to use his magic to spin the giant fans within 30 seconds. The number of rotations would determine his score. He replied that he did. The average score for the test was 1,513 spins, and the best record was 4,022 spins. He stretched out his hand, remembering that in the past 3 years, he couldn't even move the fans, no matter how hard he tried. He couldn't control mana because he couldn't feel it at all, but now he could feel it circulating around him. From his right foot, it flowed upward into his body, circling inside him and returning to his right foot. He also knew that he could accelerate the cycle with his breathing and release it through the palm of his right hand. The professor then shouted for him to start. He released his mana into the fan, and the count machine began to register the spins. Suddenly, the fan spun rapidly, speeding up the count and shocking the professors. The fan turned so fast that the counting machine couldn't keep up, and the air from the fan made it difficult for the professors to see the score. Then, the machine holding the fan exploded, and the fan flew away. It soared towards a building, causing the students to panic, and crashed directly into the headmaster's office, causing a loud explosion. The headmaster narrowly avoided being hit and collapsed from the shock. Ikehara's secretary was in disbelief, but Ikehara laughed, saying it seemed Kannagi and he were alike. Ikehara then looked at him, declaring that Kannagi was the second person in history after him to achieve an immeasurable score. The professor, who had witnessed everything, shouted that he had passed the hunter examination. The students cheered for him, exclaiming that he had achieved the best record in every test. He looked at his hand in disbelief, tears streaming down his face, and thanked them profusely, amazed that the power had been inside him all this time. Hinoki smiled, expecting this outcome, and Kannagi knew that by lending his body to the founders, the potential within him had been awakened. Laughingly, Hinoki told him that he was not an ordinary person with the crest of nothingness and that he had been waiting for him for more than a century. Hinoki then asked if they would agree and Kannagi might fulfill their wish, believing that he might be the one they had been waiting for. Just then, a strong aura landed in front of him, shocking him. He stutteringly asked what it was and if it was an explosion, but Hinoki recognized it as the tremendous aura he had felt that morning. Ikehara greeted him, and he was stunned to see the legendary figure standing before him. Ikehara congratulated him on his hunter examination results. He stutteringly thanked Ikehara, unable to believe that the legend knew his name and wondering what was happening. Ikehara then said they should start an additional test for him, suggesting they call it try to hit the strongest hunter at least once, which shocked him to his core. Ikehara Midori, a 23-year-old man, became a full-fledged hunter at the age of 9. No one could deny that he was the world's strongest hunter. Ikehara turned thousands of demons into ashes in an instant, and weak demons and even hunters could be easily killed with a mere fraction of his power. He single-handedly conquered the Pandemonium outbreak 10 years ago and the Kyushu outbreak 5 years ago, earning him the title of a living singularity. This is why it was such a shock when Ikehara told him to try to hit him at least once. Hinoki called out excitedly, urging him to lend his body to him immediately. Ikehara then explained the simple rule: if he could land a hit within the next minute, he would win. Even if he lost, there would be no punishment. Additionally, Ikehara would only attack once every 10 seconds. Ikehara assured him there was no need to worry, as he would go easy on him and he could use any skill he wanted, while Ikehara wouldn't use any skills at all. Ikehara then summoned a swarm of different weapons, telling him he could choose any weapon he liked. This surprised him, and he wondered what was happening. He was confused about the additional test and whether he could really fight the famous Ikehara Midori head-on in that 1-minute time frame. He asked Ikehara if he could really use any weapon, and Ikehara grabbed a katana, replying that he could use them absolutely because his body was harder than a katana. Ikehara then easily cut the katana in half, stating that his body was sharper than any sword. He snapped out of his thoughts when Hinoki shouted at him to hurry up and switch with him. Hinoki then angrily asked how dare Ikehara say such words, shouting that he couldn't forgive Ikehara now. This made him realize that Hinoki was getting excited and that Ikehara's power was at the same level as the founders, meaning he didn't stand a chance. Behind him, Hinoki was fuming with anger, staring at Ikehara. He sighed and faced Ikehara with a brave face. The students watched excitedly, shouting that something interesting was starting, a real battle with Ikehara. Hinoki asked what he was doing and was about to tell him to lend him his body quickly. But then Ikehara started the timer, smiling as he told him they should begin. He grabbed a sword and rushed at Ikehara to attack. Hinoki asked if he was planning on fighting alone, insisting it wasn't fair, but he continued to attack anyway, knowing it was meaningless. He knew for sure that to become a legend, he couldn't just borrow the power of the founders, he had to do it with his own power. He then tried to slash Ikehara, but Ikehara easily dodged without moving much. Kannagi continuously attacked Ikehara while Ikehara was on the phone, asking him which social media he was using and telling him that he was sure the incident would be recorded and go viral. The students couldn't believe that Ikehara was on his phone while effortlessly dodging all of Kannagi's attacks, shouting that Ikehara was incredibly strong. Despite his efforts, Kannagi couldn't land a single hit on Ikehara, who wasn't even taking the fight seriously. The students were amazed by Kannagi's relentless attacks, yet one of them thought something was off about his movements. They wondered how long the fight would continue while watching intently. Kannagi lifted his sword, feinting a vertical slash before switching to a horizontal one aimed at Ikehara's feet and throat, successfully executing the move. Kannagi was amazed at how his body could move exactly as he wanted, realizing he didn't tire from the movements. He wondered if it was the effect of lending his body to the founders, knowing his body was changing. His thoughts were interrupted when Ikehara placed a finger on Kannagi's head, preparing to flick him, and mentioned that 10 seconds had already passed. Fortunately, Kannagi dodged in time, but Ikehara's released power destroyed the field, making Kannagi realize that his head would have been gone if the attack had hit. Ikehara looked at his hand in confusion, thinking it was strange since he didn't sense any evil from Kannagi and couldn't believe he had mistakenly adjusted his output. Meanwhile, Kannagi panicked, knowing he would be killed at this rate, and tried to recall the feeling of his stronger self. He then released a strong aura, surprising Ikehara. Kannagi attacked Ikehara again, and the students were amazed by his increasing speed, though he still couldn't land a hit. The students shouted that the camera couldn't keep up with their movements. Ikehara noticed Kannagi's increased speed and sensed a different atmosphere, wondering if there was a condition to activate this power or if Kannagi wanted to keep it a secret. Realizing another 10 seconds had passed, Ikehara decided decided to attack Kannagi lightly this time. He bent down and positioned his finger to flick again, but this time he hit Kannagi in the chest, sending him slamming into the wall hard. Kannagi coughed up blood but thought it was awesome and marvelous to be fighting against the world's strongest awakened. He knew that if his body were the same as yesterday's and had taken that hit, he would already be dead. This realization made him smile because he knew it meant he was getting stronger. However, he also knew that with his current skill, he wouldn't be able to pass Ikahara's test. He decided to brute force his way through the remaining time he had and ran towards Ikahara again. Suddenly, Ikahara appeared next to him with incredible speed, making Kannagi stop and look to his side. Ikahara apologized and told him he had seen enough. He added that the 30 seconds were up, then hit Kannagi on the nape, causing him to slowly fall asleep. As Kannagi fell to the ground, Ikahara thought he could see that Kannagi was a genius, but not on the same level as his comrades. In the end, Kannagi couldn't fully demonstrate the power Ikahara had glimpsed. Ikahara called his secretary, telling her they should head back and expressing his disappointment with the result. Suddenly, Kannagi grabbed his sword, and Ikahara felt a strong aura behind him. Kannagi, now under Hinoki's control, asked Ikahara what he had said. Ikahara looked back and saw Kannagi releasing a powerful aura. Hinoki, controlling Kannagi's body, told Ikahara that the stubborn brat was already in bed, so he could finally use the body. Hinoki then walked closer to Ikahara and suggested they should play a little bit longer. Kannagi's spirit, out of his own body, panicked when he saw that Hinoki was now controlling it. However, Ikahara smiled, recognizing the presence he had felt earlier. This made him question if it was a different person or just a skill, but regardless, he knew that Kannagi was now a monster. Kannagi then attacked and shouted at him not to space out. He noticed that Kannagi's movements had changed, his speed and power were on a different level. Suddenly, Ikahara felt a sword near his face and ducked just in time to dodge it. Kannagi swung his sword again, and Ikahara leaped away to create distance. Still in shock, Kannagi positioned his sword and swung it once more, but Ikahara bent down in time, causing Kannagi to slash the building behind him instead. The students inside the building rushed away in panic, realizing the danger. Ikahara noticed that Kannagi's slashes were becoming unpredictable, yet he could anticipate his opponent's movements. It felt like ancient swordsmanship to him, like a torrent of water. Ikahara stretched out his palm, laughingly telling Kannagi that such skill was needed to defeat an S rank like him. He then raised his palm to make Kannagi sleep again, noting that only 40 seconds had passed. But Kannagi moved closer with incredible speed and swung his sword, shouting that there was no way Ikahara could hit him. Ikahara jumped away to dodge the attack and laughingly told Kannagi that his skills were amazing. The students couldn't believe what they were witnessing, or that Ikahara Midori was on the defensive. Kannagi shouted that Ikahara was boring and that there was no need to hold back against him. He also warned Ikahara that he would beat him up if he looked down on him. Kannagi then leaped to attack, but Ikahara laughed and replied, "Fine." He kicked a stone and it headed into the weapons behind him. All the weapons float in the air. Ikahara jumped, surprising Kannagi, and grabbed one of the weapons floating above them. He excitedly tells Ikahara that he's finally going all out. They then engage in an intense mid-air battle, foot on foot, stunning the students who watch in amazement. They grab every weapon in sight and shatter them into pieces with their sheer strength. Meanwhile, inside Kannagi's body, the founders observe Hinoki going full throttle. They are impressed that Ikahara manages to hold his own against Hinoki. One founder, feeling envious, remarks on the fun and pitiful nature of not being the one to fight while he watches in silence. One of the founders asks if this means Kannagi's body isn't yet a perfect vessel. An old man suggests joining the fray, but another founder tells him to stop, calling him tactless. The great wizard silently stares, surprised to realize that he is studying Hinoki's movements, trying to learn from them. He notices Hinoki pouncing from below, shifting his center of gravity, but the sword Hinoki wields shatters into pieces once again. Hinoki, frustrated by the low-quality sword, feels a surge of anger. Ikahara, on the other hand, finds the battle exhilarating, his heart racing with excitement. However, Ikahara notices that there are no swords left and wonders if Kannagi will resort to using firearms. Ikahara then taunts Hinoki, shouting that there are only 10 seconds left and teasingly asks what he'll do now. Hinoki glances back at the building behind him and leaps toward it. He heads for the man who had pushed Kannagi earlier and snatches the man's sword. Just then, Ikahara jumps closer, launching his fist at Hinoki, causing a loud explosion upon impact with the building. Fortunately, Hinoki dodges the attack and reappears in front of Ikahara. They resume their mid-air battle, foot on foot, enjoying the fight as if it were a game. Ikahara shouts that it's fun and suggests they continue a bit longer, while the students notice their building is on the verge of collapsing. The combatants reach the top of the building where Ikahara's secretary watches intently. Ikahara then places his hand on a huge fan and grabs it, causing it to crack. He sees Ikahara take out the fan from the headmaster's room and aims it at him. Ikahara then threw the fan at him, but he was surprised when Hinoki used his one-handed sword style to slash the fan before it hit him. The fan shattered into tiny pieces, and Ikahara shouted excitedly, telling him he was truly amazing. However, Hinoki simply launched his sword, telling Ikahara to eat it. Yet, to his shock, the sword shattered into pieces. Ikahara raised his hand, aiming at him. Ikahara then told him that 60 seconds had passed and launched his palm at Hinoki, causing him to fall. Hinoki cursed, but then Kannagi jumped onto Hinoki's back, shouting "not yet," and pushed Hinoki back towards the other founders. He then gently tapped Ikahara's palm aside, dodging Ikahara's attack, which shocked both Hinoki and Ikahara. However, one of his hands was dislocated from the impact. Still, he told Ikahara that he only needed a single hit and punched Ikahara in the face with his other hand. The battle between the singularities felt like it lasted an eternity from the inside, a fierce struggle for a seemingly small answer, akin to a chess game where both players are equally skilled. Hinoki knew that despite the intensity, it had only lasted a brief moment. He smiled proudly, realizing that Kannagi had opened a new path to victory. However, Kannagi was in shock when he saw that Ikahara had stopped his fist in time. He cursed, knowing he hadn't hit him, but then Ikahara smiled and pulled his fist to his face, surprising him. Ikahara then happily told him that he had passed before they both slammed into the ground. A moment later, the students watching were confused, asking what had happened. Ikahara, holding Kannagi, collapsed and called his secretary, Rin, telling her they should go back. Rin appeared next to Ikahara, asking how it went. Ikahara replied that Kannagi had passed and that he was interesting. But since he had accidentally broken Kannagi's arm, she should help fix it. She replied that she understood. The students, hearing Ikahara, couldn't believe that Kannagi had passed. Suddenly, they cheered for him, realizing that passing meant he had landed a hit on Ikahara, which woke Kannagi up. Rin, who was healing him, told him to let her heal his arm and not to move, which he agreed to, thanking her. Rin then congratulated him on passing the test. Kannagi thanked her for the compliment, but then sat up in shock, asking if he had really passed and if he had truly landed a hit on Ikahara. Suddenly, Ikahara appeared next to him, saying it was cruel for him to forget so soon, shocking Kannagi. Ikahara then told him that they were even now and a pass is a pass. He mentioned that he went serious midway through his consecutive attacks, but Hinoki didn't respond, knowing it was true. Ikahara also praised him, saying he dodged his strongest attack and his movements were amazing, urging him to be proud. Kannagi excitedly replied, yes. Kannagi then called out to Ikahara, asking what comes next after passing, making Rin look at Ikahara in confusion. Ikahara, also unsure, stared back at Kannagi, searching for an answer as the students watched intently. Later that night, at his house, his mother was frying food when she asked him how many guests were coming. While cleaning the house, he replied that he didn't know, probably only one person. His mother remarked that today was a good day. On top of passing the hunter's examination, he was being scouted by Ikahara Midori. She then told him that she always believed he was a kid who could achieve anything with effort. He warmly replied, yes. However, his mother worriedly commented that for such a celebrity to visit their house, it might be mistaken for a dog house. He shouted back that Ikahara was not that kind of person. After cleaning and helping his mother, he lay on his bed to rest and stared at Ikahara's card, wondering why Ikahara hadn't given it any thought. His mind wandered back to the field, recalling Rin taking Ikahara down and Ikahara screaming in pain. Ikahara had asked him if he didn't say he would become one of his comrades if he won. He replied, thinking he hadn't heard such words, making Rin more furious as she tightly grabbed Ikahara's feet, causing him to scream in pain. Ikahara then told him that there were too many eyes around and asked if he could visit his home tonight to discuss things in detail. He promised to explain the choices available and reveal who their real enemies were. He pondered who their real enemies could be, knowing that the tower was already destroyed by the founders and that the current hunter's task was to hunt the monsters that had escaped from the dimensional crack. He wondered if there was any other reason, but then he fell asleep. Suddenly, Hinoki shoutingly woke him up, startling him. He saw that Hinoki and the founders were there. He asked why everyone was there and what was wrong, but Hinoki simply replied that they had been discussing something and had just finished. Confused, he covered his body and asked Hinoki if they had decided who would get his body. Before Hinoki could reply, the doorbell rang. Apologizing to Hinoki, he explained that he thought Ikahara had arrived and suggested they talk about it later. He then walked to the kitchen near the door, noticing it was dark and wondering what was happening. To his shock, he saw his mother lying on the floor, collapsed. Panicking, he called out to her in worry. He rushed to his mother but stopped when he saw someone sitting in the kitchen. He saw the person grab the food his mother had made and eat it happily. Watching the man eat and compliment the food, he noticed the kitchen was a mess. The man teased him, saying he had to discipline his old lady and, if he wanted to impress customers, they should at least use expensive meat. He asked the man who he was and what he had done to his mother, but the man shouted at him to watch his mouth and introduced himself as Heitani Goru, the S-rank hunter who had come to pick him up and was one of Ikehara Midori's comrades. Heitani then told him to hurry up and take his luggage because they were moving to their base. Enraged, he launched his fist at Heitani, who dodged it and laughingly appeared behind him, asking if he was challenging him. He remained silent, remembering his mother telling him that even though his father had passed away, she would raise him alone to be a proud person. He recalled his mother's shoes being a mess, but she had told him it was fine and she could still wear them. She reminded him not to forget to buy himself new sneakers and congratulated him for doing a great job, promising to make his favorite tonkatsu for dinner. He then looked seriously at Heitani and demanded to know what he had done to his mother. Hinoki noticed that Kanagi's opponent was an S-rank hunter from that era and told everyone it was about time to act. Although he was annoyed just by looking at Ikehara's rip-off, they all knew from that fight how the founders should treat Kannagi from now on. Heitani teasingly tells him that his angry face is pretty cute. He then lifts his hand to slap him, but he just calmly waits, grabbing Heitani's hand before it hits him. He easily drags Heitani around, surprising the old founder, who remembers this move from their fights against monsters. In just minutes, the peaceful Kannagi house is destroyed as Heitani is thrown out the window, smashing through the backyard wall. Yet, Heitani manages to land on his feet before hitting the ground as he walks closer. Heitani wonders if what he just witnessed was Aikido. He recalls watching his fight with Ikehara that afternoon on video, and not only noticing his tremendous aura and swordsmanship but also that power. He then tells Heitani that he expected such resilience from an A-rank hunter, remarking that he is sturdier than his Aki. Glaring, he orders Heitani to hurry up and answer his question already. He demands to know what Heitani did to his mother, who is inside struggling in pain as poison spreads through her body. Heitani laughs and teasingly tells him that based on his words, it seems he doesn't know. Heitani then shouts that it was poison and that his mother was getting in his way, so he put her to sleep. He adds that if she's lucky, she might only suffer minor side effects. Calmly, he tells Heitani that he doesn't understand, making Heitani look at him confused. He then asks why they would hurt the family of someone who might become their comrade. But Heitani just laughs and asks if he said comrade. Heitani suddenly appears behind him, ready to attack. He avoids Heitani's slash just in time, but Heitani continuously attacks, declaring that he won't become their comrade but only a doll that obeys their orders. Heitani taunts him, saying that once they hold his precious ones hostage, he will obey because he is naive. He is then surprised when Heitani steps on his foot and slash him, mockingly asking if he was right. Creating distance away from Heitani, he feels his cheek burning and wonders what it is, noticing the poison spreading on his face. Heitani then shows his fingers, which are coated with sharp things and poison, and teasingly tells him that it's already in. He reveals that he has a skill allowing him to produce dozens of poisons from his body, called Phantom Bug's Poison, Deadly Vision. Heitani then complained that it was a bothersome mission because if he felt like it, he could release deadly toxic gas within a 5-kilometer radius, but he couldn't do it in the middle of a city. He explained that the poison would kill him within a minute, so if he agreed to join their organization, Heitani would make the antidote for him, otherwise, he would lose his life. He thought about the toxic gas that is lethal within 5 kilometers and confirmed that Heitani is an S rank, realizing that for a normal person, it would be a disaster. He then looked at his hand and called upon the god of medicine, Valentine, asking if he was right that she was inside him. This made the founders look at Valentine, who was confused and surprised. He apologized to her for calling her so suddenly and asked if she could teach him how to detoxify the poison later, to which she stutteringly replied yes. Heitani threw poison at him while asking what he was mumbling about and if the fear of death had overtaken his mind. He dodged the poison, explaining that the Aikido earlier was from the god of hands, Kudu Hayama, which surprised Kudu inside him and confirmed that he was copying his Aikido from just that one moment. He then called upon the 10,000 army slasher, Hinoki Riekairu, the blue spear of destruction, Shimer Kalskis, and the heavenly bow, Margit. He told them that he had been studying and remembered all of them from the records. He then informed Heitani that the founders he always adored were now residing inside him, which confused Heitani. But he simply told Heitani that he had no reason to be afraid of him, making Heitani pissed and shoutingly ask how about he teaches him the world of pain. Heitani ran towards him, laughingly telling him that the next poison would make him beg for his life to end. He jumped away to dodge Heitani's attack, and when Heitani hit a nearby tree, it dissolved and died. Heitani then launched another attack, shouting that if he begged and kneeled, he would at least relieve some pain with antidotes. He warned that once he was corrupted by pain, he would never be able to return to normal after going crazy because of it. but he just silently waited for Heitani's hand to get closer, and when he saw that Heitani was close enough, he slid his body to the side and put his hand on Heitani's chest, activating the Fist of Saint, Wantak attack. Heitani coughed up blood when he hit him, which surprised Wantak inside him. Heitani then slammed into a streetlight from the force, and he kicked his face with the Feet of Light, Eilerson, throwing him a distance away, which surprised Eilerson inside him. Yet Heitani managed to stand on his feet, and he swiftly appeared in front of him. As he launched an attack at Heitani, Heitani retaliated with both of his hands. However, he managed to slip through his attack on Heitani's hands, breaking some of his nails, and used the sharp break, Karail attack, which hit Heitani's stomach, making Karail look at him proudly. He then slashed Heitani with the Dragon's Claw, Rowan's skill, stunning Rowan in surprise inside him. He then grabbed Heitani, activated the Flipper of Lilac, and threw Heitani around in midair. Heitani, floating, wondered what the hell was happening. He knew that once someone is exposed to poison, their judgment should be clouded and the poison should have already affected his nervous system, yet he was still moving fine and strong. He then activated the Magus of Truth, Melchia's Silencias, which surprised her, and then released it on Heitani, causing a loud explosion and leaving all the founders in disbelief. Hinoki asked the founders if he was right that they all saw it and told them that just after defeating that insect once, Kannagi was copying all of their moves, both physical and magical. Hinoki also mentioned that he didn't care whether Kannagi's power was from the crest of nothingness or not, but for him, Kannagi was interesting, and they all agreed. Hinoki then told everyone that they should nurture Kannagi because if he was trained by the founders, he would become the strongest Awakener while Kannagi was panically calling for his mother. The scene then shifts to, in the street, men are jumping and running from rooftop to rooftop, with one of them shouting to everyone not to slack off because there are already 15 guilds on the move to get their hands on the boy who fought with Ikehara Midori. He urges them to be fast, but Ikehara appears behind the man, asking if it was really that many, which shocks the man. Ikehara calmly tells him that if it's 15, then he should be the last one, pointing his fingers near the man's forehead. Ikehara then flips the man's head, making him slam hard on the building's roof. Ikehara, with his ravens, calls Rin. Rin, on the other side, replies that she has arrived and that there are no Awakeners detected nearby, but it looks like someone arrived there before them, which surprises Ikehara. Rin then informs him that it was an S-rank hunter named Heitani Goru, the poison user, and that he came to visit Kannagi but was defeated miserably, while looking at Kannagi who was collapsed on the rooftop with his mouth open, making Ikehara confused. A moment later, they arrive at his house, and Ikehara clappingly praises Kannagi for being amazing, telling him that he never expected he could actually do it, but he really defeated an S-rank hunter on top of it. Ikehara then asks him if he is okay and if he got exposed to the poison, to which Kannagi replies yes, scratching his cheek and telling him that he and his mother are fine. Hinoki then asks what he meant by fine, reminding him that without Valentine there, he would have met the Buddha already, while looking at Valentine who was complaining that she was tired. Hinoki tells Valentine that she is pretty good, finishing everything within only 5 seconds, and she replies that since the one producing the poison was there, extracting some blood samples was quite simple, recalling how she continuously poked Heitani's body to find the antidote. Ikehara apologizes to Kannagi for being late and explains that he has taken measures against many organizations that are aiming for him because of today's video. This makes Kannagi ask Ikehara if it meant that Heitani was lying by saying that he was his comrade, to which Ikehara replies yes, adding that some people would use his name. Ikehara then asks Rin if she is done, and Rin appears at his side, replying yes. She then tells him that all the damages have been repaired, which surprises Kannagi when he sees that his house window and backyard wall are perfectly fixed. Ikehara then brightly tells him that they should go inside now and have a talk because it is about his future, making Kannagi stunned with nervousness. The next morning, he was outside with his suitcase when his mother asked him if he was really okay, if he had forgotten anything, if he had his wallet, and if he had brought his charger. He assured his mother that he was fine and told her not to worry too much, but she looked at him worriedly, wondering if he was really going to Ikehara's place. Last night, Ikehara had told his mother that he had undiscovered talents and begged her to entrust him to him, swearing that he would make him a great hunter. He excitedly shouted that it was awesome and told his mother that he had been chosen by Ikehara, but he was confused when he saw his mother silent. Back in the present, his mother gave him his lunch, knowing that he hadn't had breakfast, and told him that she had put it in a container and he could throw it away if he didn't like it. He once again assured his mother that he was fine and became silent when he remembered his mother asking Ikehara if it was true that in the future he would face many dangerous situations, to which Ikehara honestly replied yes. His mother told Ikehara that he had always adored the legendary founders and had always struggled until now, so it was an honor for her if he were to take him. but as a parent, she was worried. Ikehara told his mother that he knew it was the job of a hunter to go against monsters and there was no such thing as certainty. But he swore to her that he would train him to be stronger, at least to the point where he wouldn't lose against the founders, making his mother feel assured and entrust him to Ikehara. In the car, Rin asked Ikehara if it was really okay to make such a promise and reminded him that in reality, they didn't even know what would happen in the near future. Ikehara looked at them at the mirror and saw his mother telling him not to sleep while being naked because he always caught a cold because of it. He asked his mother when that happened, but she just told him to be sure to separate his colored clothes when doing laundry, which he agreed to. Ikehara then replied to Rin that he would keep his promise as best as he could. After minutes of reminders, he said goodbye to his mother because it was time to go and told her to wish him luck. He then approached the car, telling his mother to take care, and when he was about to enter, his mother called him and told him to come home during the new year, making him teary-eyed without looking back. He then entered the car and apologized to them for the wait. They then drove away, leaving his mother waving him goodbye. Ikehara asked him if he was done, to which he replied yes and added that if he looked at his mother's face one more time, his resolve would crumble. Ikehara lay down while replying that he understood and told him that it would be a long trip, so he could do anything he wanted, such as eat or sleep. He saw the food his mother had packed for him and opened it, remembering her words. When he opened the lunchbox, he was surprised to see that in his pork cutlet, a good luck message was written, making him remember the comfort, care, and sacrifices his mother made for him. He thanked her for the food and ate it with tears in his eyes while Rin and Ikehara listened. They then continued their journey. A moment later, they arrived at their destination, and he was amazed to see it. Ikehara welcomed him and told him that only a handful of Awakeners were allowed to be there in the anti-prophecy unit, also known as anti-prophecy, which was their headquarters. He was stunned in amazement. Meanwhile, inside one of the rooms, a man was watching from a window and told another that they had arrived. The new members were there. A lady with black hair asked if she was right that they were talking about the new member. The yellow-haired man replied that it was rare to have a new comrade. But the red-haired man asked if they really said comrade and suggested that they should see if he was truly qualified to be part of the anti-prophecy or not. On the other hand, he was looking at the headquarters and asked them what the anti-prophecy unit was and if it was perhaps Ikehara's guild. Rin apologized for the delayed explanation and explained that she couldn't explain it properly to his mother because it was a top national secret, which shocked him. He asked her if she really said top national secret, and she calmly replied yes. Ikehara told him that they would discuss it very soon. They then got out of the car, and Ikehara told him that they should bring his luggage to the dorm first. Rin offered to carry his luggage, but he replied that it was fine and he could carry it himself. Just then, someone shouted for them to wait, making him jump a little in shock. He saw a yellow-haired man above them shouting that he should be the one to explain it to him. The man then kicked at him, which he blocked, and the ground he was standing on was destroyed by the force. The man was amazed that he took his attack head-on and praised him for being pretty good. He felt that the man was strong and asked who he was. The man then pushed him back and lands on the ground while telling him to let him introduce himself. The man then proudly introduced himself as Hanada Hikateru, a member of the anti-prophecy unit and his comrade, which shocked him because he was the one to explain. Ikehara asked Rin if he could have some tea, and she replied yes while pouring him some. While they were fighting, Ikehara watched them calmly. He asked Hanada why they were doing this despite being comrades. Hanada replied that it was, of course, to explain the anti-prophecy unit to him and also to test his skills, making him ask what he meant by testing his skills. Hanada then turned around with speed to gain force and launched a kick at him, which he blocked with both of his arms. When Hanada hit him, he told him that first, he would explain the origin of the anti-prophecy unit. He managed to stay on his feet while wondering if Hanada was actually planning to explain everything during the fight. Hanada then launched at him while asking for his name before explaining everything to him. He launched to meet him, replying that his name was Kannagi Minato. Meanwhile, Ikehara was simply drinking his warm tea while watching them, thinking that Kannagi had been tested by the academy, tested by him, tested by an S rank, and even now, he was being tested. Ikehara asked Rin if she thought Kannagi was always being tested, and she replied that it couldn't be helped since Kannagi was a talent that Ikehara scouted himself. Hanada continuously kicked him, and he continuously blocked with his hands. Hanada asked him what a hunter's job was, and he replied that it was to hunt down the monsters that come out from the dimensional cracks. Hanada gave him a thumbs up and told him that his answer was correct, explaining that it was like a pest control task. Hanada then got down on the ground and asked him what about dangers other than that, which surprised him. He asked what he meant by other dangers. Hanada explained that in their world, there are dangers lurking around that are incomparable to the dimensional cracks, like the Pandemonium, 10,000 Demons Castle from 10 years ago, and the Great Outbreak of Kyushu around 5 years ago. He told Hanada that those were large-scale dimensional breaks, but then Hanada launched an attack at him. He managed to block it in time but was thrown back while Hinata told him that he was right and it is what they'll teach him at the academy, and was public knowledge. He was then surprised when Hinata appeared above him at speed, ready to axe kick him, telling him that in reality, it was different. As his foot came crashing down, it struck the tree behind his target, slicing it cleanly in half. Luckily, he managed to dodge just in time. Hinata explained that those were invasions from different dimensions, the same as the Tower of Malevolence from 300 years ago, which was an emergency situation. He couldn't believe it was the same as the tower, but Hinata also told him that the invasion had not yet ended because someone from another world was targeting their world with malicious intent. Hinata then walked closer to him, telling him that he didn't know why the Awakeners were getting weaker compared to the era of the tower, and that there were very few people who had the power on the same level as the founders. He asked Hinata what they should do, and Hinata replied that it was the reason why they existed. Hinata explained that those who could foresee the future with their skills and identify the appearance of these dangers would only tell the elites to deal with those dangers, and those elites were them, the anti-prophecy unit, making Ikahara and Rin proudly smile. He realized that they were an organization to prevent those prophecies. Hinata then told him that starting today, he was one of them. He mentioned that he was the first person who could block his kicks in a row, so he welcomed him. Hinata then extended his hand, welcoming him to the anti-prophecy unit. He shook Hinata's hand while Ikahara and Rin clapped for them. Hinata then called the other Awakeners and shouted that he had recognized his skill. They appeared above the house, and Hinata asked them what they would do, but they just silently stared at him and vanished, surprising him. Ikahara commented that they disappeared just like villains. Hinata sighed, shaking his head, and said that it seemed they wanted to see it with their own eyes. Hinata then told Ikahara to let him take it from there, and Ikahara left him with Hinata. Hinata helped him with his luggage and told him that he would show him his room in the dormitory, to which he thanked Hinata. When night arrived, he was settled in his dormitory room, busy thinking about the organization that dealt with the prophecy in the world. He wondered if the founders had also dealt with the same crisis during the era of the tower, and if he was also fighting against something that had been predicted. He grew anxious thinking about it, but then someone told him that he could just train himself, making him surprised. He saw that it was Hinoki with the other founders. He apologized to them because he hadn't talked with them, but Hinoki told him that he would now share their decision as the founders. They decided to train him to be the strongest Awakener. Just like Ikahara, with everyone together, he could become the strongest Awakener in history, and the disciple of the founders. He was surprised and asked them if they wanted him to be their disciple, to which Hinoki replied yes. He asked why and if they weren't planning on taking over his body. Hinoki laughingly replied that it was indeed a fine suggestion, but they would all be fighting for it, making him imagine a battle royale between the founders. He shouted at them not to fight because of him. Hinoki explained that it was like that at the beginning, but after looking at him thoroughly, they changed their minds. Instead of using his body for their benefit, training him seemed more interesting. Hinoki told him that when he defeated the poison user, he was able to copy all of their moves even though they were only used once. Although it was not at the same level and as proficient as theirs, he had grasped the basics already. Hinoki then asked if he understood how great his achievement was, adding that he didn't know whether it was the effect of his crest of nothingness or not, but his greatest talent was his learning speed, and that talent was stronger than any of the founders. Tears then dropped from his eyes as he listened to Hinoki's words. He remembered the trainer's disappointed looks and their comments that it seemed like he didn't have any talent. Until now, no one had any expectations for him at all, and everything felt just like a dream. He was treated like trash and continuously bullied because he failed the hunter's qualification test 3 times. He also remembered his classmates laughingly shouting at him to stop already and people always forgetting his name because they didn't care about him. No one believed in his future, yet Ikahara and Hinoki, who were big figures, recognized him, making him wonder if it was okay for such happiness to appear in his life. He couldn't believe that the people he had been admiring all this time were expecting him and had such high hopes for him. Hinoki smiled upon seeing his reaction and held him, telling him not to cry. Hinoki then explained that their souls resided inside him, especially during his sleep, so he could use the space inside freely without being bound by space or time. He told him that they would give him 100 hours worth of training every day. During the afternoon, he would train with the anti-prophecy unit, and at night, during his sleep, it would be more training. This meant they wouldn't let him have a peaceful sleep anymore, but he knew he had already resolved himself. Confidently, he replied yes and respectfully told them that he was counting on them. The night went on, and hours later, the sun rose brightly. Hinata was peacefully washing his face in the bathroom when he walked in. Hinata noticed him and greeted him with a good morning. He greeted Hinata back but still looked sleepy. He agreed, explaining that he was still not used to it yet. Hinata told him that he understood because he had felt the same way during his first day in the dorm. However, Hinata then noticed something and saw a strong aura coming out of his body, which surprised him. Hanada tried to kick him, but he simply lowered his head and spit out the water in his mouth at the same time. He walked away, telling Hanada to stop messing around in the morning because he was still sleepy, and that he would go to the cafeteria first. Hanada wondered what was happening, knowing that he had kicked him faster than yesterday, but he easily dodged it. A moment later, in the cafeteria of the anti-prophecy unit, Hanada saw a good spot and asked someone who was eating fruit if she would mind if they joined her, to which the lady replied yes. Hanada then sat down in front of her and told him to sit next to him. He then remembered that the lady in front of him was one of the comrades that Hanada had introduced yesterday. The lady then seriously called him the new guy and told him that he was finally there, making him notice that she didn't seem to welcome him. Nevertheless, he greeted her and introduced himself. She told him that she didn't care and didn't want to remember his name. She then pointed her fork at him and told him that she would call him by his name once she had accepted him. Until then, it was training time, so she would have him come with her to crush a prophecy. In 1945, the first book of prophecy was found on the continent of Antarctica at a depth of 3,000 meters inside the ice. It was called the Book of Doom. Its words are so rough that it feels like they were written by a child. The book predicted that 80 years in the future, the world would be attacked, and various future disasters were also written in it. The world decided to believe the book. While they were in the car, the lady then asked him why he thought they believed the book. He looked at the lady and told her that he still didn't know her name, but she just asked him if she had an obligation to say it and told him to hurry and answer her question. He replied that it was because the prophecy really happened. But she asked him if he was stupid and explained that if even one of the events written in the Book of Doom were to happen, it is said that the world would end, shocking him. He asked Hanada how many prophecies there were, and Hanada replied that he thought there were around 200, making him shockingly ask if they didn't think their world was already doomed. Ikehara told him that they had already prevented around 180 prophecies, which made him jump in amazement. He then reopened the question about why the world believed the book. The lady explained that the name of the explorer who found the Book of Doom was Bernard Russell, and the moment Bernard opened the book, he was greeted with the words on the first page, "Hello Bernard," followed by the date of March 17, 1945, 11:35 a.m., on a sunny day when Bernard Russell discovered the Book of Doom. Hours later, they arrived at the Tokyo Sumida Ward, at the location of a dimensional crack, which was an intermediate level. The guards stopped them and explained that passing on that road was prohibited, so they should leave. However, they just walked past them at speed, surprising the guards. He asked if it was okay, to which Hanada replied yes. The lady then explained the third world was the dark side of the moon, the invasive pandemic, and the floating trees. Every one of them was an emergency and a serious crisis. Also, the pandemonium outbreak that Ikehara closed. Even if there are some exceptions in the Book of Doom, we already knew that there are many other grimoires of prophecies around the world. So, in order to collect and analyze the pieces of information and act accordingly, the anti-prophecy unit was established. It deals with rank 3 destruction of one or multiple regions, rank 2 national emergencies, rank 1 affecting the environment of the whole planet, and the special rank in super dangerous destruction of the world, as mentioned in the Book of Doom. He replied that he understood and asked her in a panic if those jobs were only for them from now on. She calmly replied that it was given, of course, after joining the anti-prophecy unit. The man then told Kisaragi that someone was coming and saw them walking past the cautious yellow line, asking if they were civilians. Kisaragi shouted to them that the place was dangerous, so they should go home. However, she told Kannagi that today's prophecy was a rank 3, and that dimensional crack in front of them looked like an intermediate B rank at a glance, but it was actually a rank 3 disaster, yellow journal. She knew that the crack would soon open further. Just as she said it, the crack opened wider in a second, making Kisaragi look back in shock and ask what was happening. She then said that a rank and above monsters would be pouring out, which is exactly what happened. Kisaragi shouted to his men to prepare for battle and then attacked the monsters in front of him, but his men were killed, making him cuss in panic. He noticed that the B and C rank hunters were struggling, and he felt the pressure emitted from a boss-level monster. Kisaragi saw them walking forward and called them civilians, telling them to back off, but she cast a Trismegistus spell and put her hand on the ground. She then raised a swarm of spears from underground and threw them at the monsters, killing them instantly by stabbing them to death. Hanada then also attacks the monster and used his slide skill to kick every monster in his path, shocking Kisaragi. He wondered who they were because their abilities were above his despite him being an S rank. The lady told Kisaragi to retreat now because, from their perspective, he was a civilian. Kisaragi noticed the emblem on her hand and recognized that they were from the government. Suddenly, a huge hand came out of the dimensional crack, tearing it wider, and they knew that the beastman Gilia Ulnir in front of them was above S rank. Hanada and the lady immediately rushed to attack the beastman, making Kisaragi panic and shout to them not to attack it carelessly, but they didn't listen and launched their attack together. However, Hinata was surprised when his kicks were deflected, realizing that it had anti-physical armor. Hinata jumped away as it launched toward the lady, who immediately gathered an attack in front of her to counter-attack. But then he appeared in front of her, surprising and confusing her. He simply stopped the beastman with his bare hand and used his one-tack skill, breaking the beastman armor and the ground around them from the impact. The beastman then exploded, stunning everyone in shock. Hinata knew it was a penetration shock. Moreover, he couldn't believe that he had beaten an S+ rank monster with a single hit, confirming his intuition that morning was correct. He was getting stronger in a single night. The lady shouted at him that it was unnecessary, but he knew that against an enemy with high physical resistance, using Kai to destroy the enemy from the inside was the best. He had learned it from Wantak, the 5th Saint, the previous night, the basics of penetration attack. He then looked back at the lady and told her that he went in and saved her, so at least she should tell him her name. She replied that her name was Shinomiya Akane. Hinata then used his physical enhancement skill to attack the monsters that had just emerged from the crack. Shinomiya drenched the monsters in front of her with mercury and then turned it into an explosion with her Mercurius Reject skill. They both shouted that, just like Kannagi said, it was easier if they broke them from the inside. Shinomiya then called to him and told him that they were going inside. Kisaragi shockingly told them that inside that dimensional crack was a completely different world, and that no matter what, it was insane, but he just ran past Kisaragi, heading to the crack while shouting that he was coming. They then jumped inside the dimensional crack, leaving Kisaragi stunned and surrounded by Deta-rank monsters, thinking that they were amazing and confirming that they were from the rumored secret organization. Inside, they were met by a swarm of monsters. Shinomiya raised her hand and told him that those monsters were the same as the ones outside and that there was nothing new. She then threw a swarm of spears at them, which stabbed the monsters around her. He told Hinata that Shinomiya was strong, and Hinata told him that she was the best AoE dealer of the anti-prophecy. Suddenly, a huge bear with armor appeared in front of her, and she called Hinata. Hinata immediately launched himself at the monster, telling her to leave it to him. The monster tried to grab him, but he managed to avoid it and stick to the ceiling, taunting the monster that he was there. Hinata then launched a powerful series of kicks with his kick skill. He praised Hinata for being cool, making Hinata proudly smile. He then jumped onto the ceiling too and attacked the monster with his feet, imitating Hinata. He asked Hinata if it was something like that, making Hinata smile in disbelief. After killing the huge monster, they ran deeper, and Shinomiya noticed that the number of enemies was decreasing, making her ask if they were finally there. He was shocked when he saw a huge different place inside the dimension, and suddenly, they heard a loud growl coming from above them. A monster then descended in front of them, and they were all shocked to see how huge it was. The Minotaur monster furiously screamed, revealing itself as the boss, the Blind Minotaur, which was S3+ rank. Shinomiya told it that it was finally there and asked if it was the boss of that place. She then activated her Trismegistus power, and a strong light appeared beneath the Minotaur. Golden spears emerged from the ground, and she used her El Dorado skill to attack the Minotaur. She shouted to him that rule number 1 against a strong enemy was to use their strongest attack first, and not give them any chance to counterattack. She then shouted to them that she was going all out until her consciousness faded and she would leave the finishing blow to them. Hinata released his power while laughingly saying that it must be nice to have a flashy skill just like Shinomiya. He stood in the back, stunned in amazement at their attacks, but he told them that it was not enough, making them glance back at him confused. Shinomiya shoutingly asked him if he had any complaints about her strongest attack, but before he could answer, the Minotaur raised its axe, which shocked them all. It then slammed its axe on the ground, breaking the ground and the ceiling in the process. She asked if they were kidding her, but Shinomiya and Hinata were even more surprised to see that it was unscathed. Suddenly, he heard one of the founders speak inside him, saying they were talented. He peeked back and saw that it was Killick, the alchemist. Killick told him that Shinomiya's alchemy speed, accuracy, purity, and everything was great, and it was a shame for such a talent to be killed at a young age. Killick then explained that he gave Shinomiya full marks for her method against an unknown enemy. If it were a boss at her level, she should have been able to defeat it easily, but that was not the case here. She underestimated the physical resistance of her enemy, which was 100%. He asked Killick what they should do, but Killick just laughed, while Hinata and Shinomiya tried their best to attack the Minotaur. Hinata told her that it seemed to have high physical resistance, and she replied that she should have come with someone with magic. She was then surprised when Kannagi appeared beside her, not knowing he was possessed by the god of the alchemist, Killick. Killick began to cast a huge Trismegistus, while Killick tells him to lend him his body for a moment because he would show an example to Shinomiya. He used the Mercurius skill to successfully affect the Minotaur. Shinomiya was surprised and shouted, asking him how he was able to use the same skill as her and what he had just done. He called her a fool for not being flexible in her expertise and explained that to become an alchemist, one has to know how to use substances in 3 different forms. He then ordered the mercury inside the Minotaur to boil, burning the inside of the Minotaur, and making the mercury come out of its body hot, cooking the Minotaur's internal organs. Hinata covered his mouth, shouting that it was really boiling. Shinomiya couldn't believe what she was witnessing, but she figured out that instead of using it as a physical attack, Kannagi was using it at an extremely high temperature, which was such a meticulous process while they watched the Minotaur scream and cry in pain. Chilik then came out of his body and told him that he was fine with him but wanted Shinomiya to become his disciple too, making Kannagi worriedly tell Chilik to stop joking around. Minutes later, the S3 plus boss Blind Minotaur was completely dissolved, and with the defeat of the Blind Minotaur boss, stopping the rank 3 prophecy yellow journal succeeded. Shinomiya thought it was impossible because the only skills that should be usable by an Awakener are those that reside in their crest. Kannagi was supposed to be in the same class as Hinata, a Taijutsu user, yet Kannagi could use alchemy just like her. This made her wonder who Kannagi really was. He then extended his hand to her and introduced himself as Kannagi Minato, telling her to remember him well. This made her angry, yet she accepted his hand and replied that she would remember him very well. Hinata watched them with a smile, thinking that Kannagi was finally being recognized by Shinomiya. A moment later, outside the crack, the adventurers noticed that the dimensional crack was closing, making them panic. They wondered what the hell was happening inside. Just then, Kannagi emerged, followed by Hinata, which made the men cheer and shout that the people who went inside had returned safely. Kannagi tried to help Shinomiya, but she ignored him and jumped out on her own just as the crack disappeared. He then asked if their mission was finished, and she replied that they just needed to report back to headquarters. Hinata commented that it had been a rough mission. Kisaragi then approached them, bowed, and thanked them for saving him and his men. He told them that he wouldn't expect them to explain who they were affiliated with or what had happened inside. Shinomiya agreed and thanked him for his understanding. She then showed her necklace pendant and told Kisaragi to include the emblem in his report, as it would explain everything. Kisaragi acknowledged this and told them to seek them out in times of danger, but she replied that there was no need to worry. Such cases were rare and they might not meet again, so they should return to their daily lives. This made Kisaragi smile, realizing that they were civilians in the end. On May 11th, in Prefecture K Village, a bright red light hit the village and spread rapidly, marking the whole area. Meanwhile, at the anti-prophecy headquarters, Shinomiya and her team arrived. She mentioned that they still needed to write a report, but Hinata checked his phone and informed them that they were being summoned. She asked why they were being summoned right after a mission and where it was from. Hinata replied that it was from the laboratory. A few minutes later, they arrived at the anti-prophecy headquarters, laboratory, 3rd conference room. They were surprised to see 2 serious-looking men inside the room. The red-haired man, Sue, remarked that it seemed Shinomiya took a long time just to close a rank 3 disaster, noting that if he recalled correctly, Sue was present when they met him. Shinomiya shouted at Sue to stop acting high and mighty, reminding him that he was not their leader, prompting Hinata to tell them to calm down. She then asked Director Kurihara what he needed from them. Kurihara started a video and told them to watch it, as it had been sent by the analysis team. They saw a burning object, and Shinomiya asked if it was charcoal. Kurihara replied that it was a prophecy grimoire, explaining that it had been found burned in a volcanic area and had been under analysis since then. He mentioned that although it was burnt, recent AI and X-ray technology had allowed them to decipher part of it. While the content was unclear, one prophecy specifically mentioned Japan, which shocked everyone. Shinomiya was surprised to hear about a completely new prophecy. He asked Hinata if this was rare, and Hinata replied that he had never heard of it before. He explained that the Anti-Prophecies Research Department was excellent at gathering information about prophecies worldwide, and normally, a new type of prophecy should be impossible, but this case was special. Sue then summarized that all 4 of them needed to investigate the matter. Kurihara commended Sue's sharpness and informed them that the usual members were away, which was why Akihara was not there when they returned. Kurihara requested that all 4 of them be scouts for this investigation and said he would send the details via email, asking them to depart immediately. This shocked Kannagi, who asked if it was a new mission right away. Shinomiya told him that such situations happen sometimes, and Hinata assured him that he would get used to it soon, making him realize that the fate of the world was at stake. Sue then stood up and declared that he and his 3 subordinates accepted the mission. Shinomiya furiously shouted at Sue, demanding to know who his subordinates were. They proceeded to head to their mission while Kurihara reminded them that the scale of the mission was still unknown due to the sudden news. He advised them to be careful and to wait for the main force if the prophecy were to happen. He thought it was a special mission with an unknown rank and tried to reassure himself that it was just a scouting mission. Kannagi suggested that they should rest now as they had just finished their previous mission, and it could cause problems later if they were too tired. Shinomiya snapped back, telling Sue not to order her around and insisted she was fine without sleep. Kannagi replied that he would take that offer, and Hinata said goodnight, leaving Shinomiya surprised. The two men slept peacefully on either side of her while she pushed herself, slapping her face and telling herself she wouldn't sleep. However, just minutes later, she fell asleep, drooling. Later, Sue shouted at her to wake up, startling her awake. She rushed outside angrily, demanding to know why he didn't wake her up. But he just told her to look down. She looked down and was shocked to see a mark in the village. Hinata noted that the situation was pretty bad and that the prophecy was almost complete. She observed a large magic circle and asked if the red pillars represented the 23 residents in the report. Sue confirmed, noting it was similar to the incident at Wakayama's mansion. He explained that 30 years ago, during a similar prophecy, they had narrowly avoided a dimensional hole opening. Suddenly, the pillars began to shine, causing them to panic. Hinata shouted that they needed to move fast. Hinata asked what they should do, and Sue grabbed his sword from his back, replying that they had to stop it. Shinomiya remembered Kirihara's instructions to wait for the main force and asked if they were planning to ignore the director's words. Suddenly, they heard a strong explosion behind them. Turning around, they saw that it was coming from Kannagi's power. He asked if they were ready to go. Shinomiya and Hinata were surprised to see that Kannagi was stronger than he had been that morning. Sue acknowledged that Kannagi wouldn't hold them back and then jumped, shouting for them to follow him. Kannagi jumped next, while Hinata ran down, and Shinomiya floated to follow them, warning them not to be reckless and shouting at Sue not to order them around. Meanwhile, the founders saw the shining pillars and smelled a nostalgic scent. Inoki agreed, saying they had smelled it many times during their lives. Near the tomb, the ground rose up, and a hand emerged from under the ground. Inoki identified it as the smell of a forbidden technique. Prophecy, Book of Scorching Heat. Walking through 10,000 moons, a red moon shall appear silently, and the scorched bright sky will lead into the underworld. An Awakener, Bandu Shijima, the leader of Dark Magus, committed genocide during the peace period. He was soon killed by the Onmyojis, but in the process, a certain village was dragged into the ordeal. Shijima, coughing in pain and splattering blood on the ground, knew he wouldn't hold on much longer. However, he vowed that in 1,000 years, he would be alive again, devour every living being, and reign over the world as a demon king. In the end, Bandu Shijima left his forbidden technique in the world, and the magic circle he had drawn showed how living beings would be sacrificed for his resurrection. The team then figured out that their mission was now to investigate and prevent the prophecy of scorching heat. Boss Bandu Shijima was resurrected, but he was disappointed to find himself with only a little power, wondering if the sacrifices had been insufficient. Looking around, he noticed that despite 1,000 years passing, the place hadn't changed much. He guessed it was fine because there were still living sacrifices around. As they launched an attack on him together, Shijima activated his dark art, a plate of yin, which released a strong fire at them. He worriedly called for Hinata and Shinomiya, but they both replied that they were fine. He warned them to look below, and they were shocked to see hands emerging from the ground, realizing there was another threat at their landing spot. Shijima then used his dark art, Death Realm, releasing a swarm of hands from underground to grab Shinomiya, and Hinata rendering them immobile. They realized that Shijima was an expert in using his skills, which meant their enemy was really strong. Shijima then dodged his penetration attack, and the Dragon's Claw of Rowan, and the Feet of Light of Eilerson. However, Shijima dodged them and remarked that his movements were not bad, but he was still an amateur. Kannagi was then surprised when a plate of yin appeared beneath him and once again released a strong fire. However, Shijima was even more surprised when he avoided it and saw him gathering power at his hands. He used his thunderbolt and threw it at Shijima, but Shijima easily caught it with his finger, which surprised him. Shijima then told him that it was a pretty good attempt. At that moment, Sue appeared behind Shijima and launched his sword with his chrysanthemum skill. The attack was about to caught Shijima, but Sue was pissed when he saw Shijima upside down balancing with his nail on his sword, telling him that it was close. Sue raised his sword, telling Shijima that from the beginning, he knew he wouldn't lose with that much power. He then pierced his sword into the ground, activating his Autumn Thistle skill, which released a rainfall of attacks. Shijima easily dodged them, laughing and commenting that it looked like rain, with Sue's skill essentially creating multiple light swords. Shijima raised his hand, admitting he wasn't proficient with swords but knew how to stop Sue. He thrust his hand at Sue, who fortunately blocked it with his sword in time. Shijima praised him, acknowledging him as the strongest person in the group. Shijima and Sue continued to fight, and Kannagi noticed that Sue was practically bottomless in strength, completely different from any enemies he had encountered before. He felt that Sue was as strong as Ikehara or even the founders, making him wonder what to do next. Suddenly, he heard Shinomiya shout his name and saw them burning the hands with their magic power. Hinata and Shinomiya rushed to help Sue, with Shinomiya shouting at him not to just watch. Shijima threw something at them, warning them not to get in his way. They were surprised as different colors of magic power swirled closer to them. The magic power then transformed into skeleton demons. Hinata kicked and Shinomiya hurled magic power at them, shouting for them to move away. They were pissed when they realized that the monsters' bodies were the same as that of a minotaur. A green minotaur skeleton monster appeared in front of him, but he simply exhaled, gathered power in his fist, and swung it at the monster. Meanwhile, Sue fought Shijima one-on-one. Shijima teased him, saying it was bad that Sue wouldn't be able to get any help. Sue managed to slash Shijima's shoulder and retorted, asking what he meant by help when he didn't need any. Sue recalled someone telling him to stay away, claiming he was enough on his own. Sue then told Shijima that the only thing he could rely on in this world was his own ability, which made Shijima laugh and shout that he also didn't need anyone else and would devour everything. Shijima then launched his hands at Sue with incredible speed. Sue tried his best to block every attack with his sword, knowing he needed to be faster. Suddenly, Sue heard Kannagi shouting his name and dashed toward him. Shijima peeked back, wondering why Sue was there and how the skeleton demons were faring. He saw that Shinomiya and Hinata were fighting the two skeleton demons and that the green one was defeated. Sue then hit Shijima in the face with his fist, causing Shijima to swirl away. Sue was surprised and Kannagi acknowledged that fighting Shijima alone would be reckless. He then tells him they should join forces and defeat him together. Sue noticed that even Hinata and Shinomiya couldn't defeat those demons instantly, yet Kannagi did it effortlessly. This made Sue wonder who Kannagi really was. Sue then shouted at Kannagi to stay away, which shocked him. Sue insisted that he didn't need anyone's help and would defeat Shijima by himself. Kannagi, bewildered, asked Sue what he was talking about. At that moment, Shijima appeared in front of them, pointing his hand at them and saying he also liked to enjoy things alone. Shijima gathered power in his hand, and Sue cut off Shijima's hand just in time while jumping away. However, when Shijima released his Megatsu's breath skill, Kannagi didn't dodge it and was thrown away. Shijima then reattached his hand and launched an attack at Sue while laughing. Fortunately, Sue blocked it with his sword. Meanwhile, Kannagi, severely injured, found himself in a tree. When he opened his eyes, he saw the founders in front of him. Hinoki told him that he had fainted, allowing them to finally summon him there. Despite the pain in his body, Kannagi stood up, insisting he had to go back. Malchus told him he had to step away from the fight, which surprised and confused him. Meanwhile, Shijima and Sue continued their battle. Shijima remarked that their ways of thinking were the same, and Sue noticed he couldn't cut Shijima with his skills anymore. Shijima declared that they didn't need anyone else and that he would devour everything. Shijima then slashed Sue's sword in half, shocking him. Sue quickly took out another sword from his inventory and tried to pierce Shijima, but Shijima easily dodged it, teasingly shouting at Sue to entertain him more. Sue did his best to fight back. Hinoki told Kannagi that Sue was stronger compared to Hinata or Shinomiya, yet Sue was still not on par with the Dark Magus. It was something too much for him to handle right now. Malchus explained that Shijima's precision in performing his resurrection was extremely high. If many humans were living in that place, then Shijima was practically a demon king already. If Shijima were to consume Sue's life, he would definitely get stronger, leading to many civilian casualties. Hinoki told Kannagi that they could say the unknown rank prophecy was pure coincidence because they found that grimoire, and that they should leave the situation to the founders. He said Kannagi just needed to lend his body to them. However, Kannagi disagreed, which shocked both founders. Apologizing, he explained that this was no longer training, it was the real thing. He stated that in the future, he had to overcome any obstacles on his path with his own strength. He then asked if he was wrong. Malchus tried to disagree, but Hinoki laughed loudly, shouting that Kannagi had already beaten them. Hinoki then asked if Kannagi was right about surpassing them, the founders. He told Kannagi to use everything he had learned and do it his way. Kannagi agreed and began to walk away, but then turned around, called them masters, and asked them to watch over him. He then dashed towards Shijima and Sue at full speed, leaving Hinoki smiling and Malchus stunned. Meanwhile, Shijima continued to attack Sue, teasingly asking if he had anything else, which pissed Sue off. Shijima then struck Sue's sword from beneath, sending him into the air. Gathering power, Shijima aimed at Sue, telling him it ends there. Sue accidentally let go of his sword, wondering if that was the best he could do. Suddenly, Kannagi grabbed Sue's sword, surprising him. Kannagi then told Sue he was borrowing his sword. Sue frowned and called him a newbie, but then Kannagi pushed Sue down, and he landed safely on the ground. Shijima finished gathering power and released his Megatsu breath. As it approached, Kannagi positioned himself in Hinoki's one-handed sword style, and unleashed the Gektraudachi wave-cutting blade skill, which pierced through Shijima's Magatsu breath attack and cut Shijima's hand in the process. Shijima was stunned, shocked, and wondered what that skill was. Shijima then shouted, asking who the hell Kannagi was, and Kannagi replied that he was Kannagi Minato, the man who would surpass the founders. Hinoki turns to Melches and asks her what she thinks. She responds by asking if he's wondering whether Kannagi can win against the Dark Magus. Melches then tells Hinoki that all they can do now is watch over Kannagi. However, Hinoki knows that Kannagi isn't foolish. He wonders if perhaps Kannagi learned something new during training, maybe while he was sleeping in the car, or if it's something far beyond that. This thought excites Hinoki as he watches Kannagi battling Shijima. Meanwhile, Sue observes Kannagi using Hinoki's one-handed sword style technique, making him question who Kannagi really is. Sue recalls when Kannagi suggested they join forces to defeat Shijima together, but Sue had refused, insisting he didn't need anyone's help in battle. Now, biting his lip in frustration, he regrets his decision. As he swings his sword, believing he will finally cut Shijima's neck, Shijima suddenly disappears with blinding speed, reappearing in front of him and activating a skill. Shijima unleashes the dark art, pomegranate skill, and he instinctively jumps to the side to avoid the attack. However, the pomegranates veer toward him, pursuing him even as he leaps upward. Realizing they won't stop until they hit their target, he begins to panic. Landing on the ground, he drives his sword into the earth while the pomegranates continue to chase him. He then raises his leg into position, and Wantak smiles in recognition, recalling that it was he who taught Kannagi this technique. Kannagi activates the aftershock technique, using it to summon a massive block of stone to shield himself from the pursuing pomegranates. The technique succeeds, and the pomegranates hit into the stone barrier. Undeterred, Shijima hurls another wave of pomegranates at Kannagi, but notices that Kannagi is now using the boulders to block them. Quickly adjusting, Kannagi launches a barrage of large rocks to intercept the pomegranates. When the pomegranates hit the rocks, they explode, sending up clouds of smoke and debris. Shijima is taken aback when he sees that Kannagi has successfully blocked all his attacks. Drawing on what he learned from Eilerson, Kannagi uses flash step and light reflection techniques to close the distance between him and Shijima with incredible speed. He appears behind Shijima just as Shijima is gathering more power to launch another attack. Sue swings his sword at Shijima, but Shijima manages to dodge at the last second, sustaining only a scratch. As Shijima blocks Kanaga's next attack with his sharp claws, he begins to wonder if Kannagi might be an irregular. Shijima then used his Plate of Yin skill, which exploded, sending him flying and injuring him since he couldn't avoid it in time. Despite the injury, he managed to position himself on one of the floating rocks, recalling the founder's advice to stick to the basics and utilize all the skills they had taught him. Gritting his teeth, he dashed at Shijima with incredible speed, attempting to slash him once more. Shijima was shocked, unable to believe what he was seeing. He noticed that the young warrior possessed swordsmanship, physique, magic, and movement skills, all at an exceptionally high level of mastery. Though these skills didn't pose a significant threat to him, he found himself wondering just how many techniques this young man had up his sleeve as he was surrounded by a flurry of rapid slashes. Hinoki and Melches watched in astonishment. Melches knew that it was one thing to fight against a monster, but to implement everything at such a high level against Shijima showed that he was growing at a tremendous speed. Yet, despite his rapid development, Melches was still uncertain. Shijima, finding his opponent intriguing, decided to use his forbidden art, unleashing a powerful surge of dark magic that shocked both the founders and Shinomiya. Suddenly, a massive skeleton foot slammed down in front of her. Fortunately, she leaped away just in time, but when she turned to look back, she was stunned to see the skeleton fusion. Shijima, with a smirk of pride, told Kannagi that his efforts were entertaining. But ultimately insufficient, it was the end. The skeleton then launched its gigantic hand, aiming to crush Kannagi to death. Hinoki, sensing the danger, shouted for Kannagi to run. But Kannagi remained still, reflecting on Shijima's words that he wasn't enough. In that moment, Kannagi realized Shijima was right. The current version of himself wouldn't be enough, even if he went all out. Closing his eyes, he knew he needed something more. He recalled Melches' lessons on magic, where she emphasized that mastery starts with the basics. He remembered her demonstrating the Shining Flame Jurla skill, activating it on his hand. Kannagi then recalled Hinoki's teachings about the one-handed sword style, explaining how it was divided into the soft sword style and the strong sword style. The wave-cutting blade skill was a powerful strike meant to cut down enemies, a technique of the strong sword style. Hinoki had instructed him that, during the vertical slash, he should forget everything, hesitation, fear, and focus solely on the life of his enemy. With this in mind, Kannagi lifted his sword, now imbued with the Shining Flame Jurla, and prepared to strike. As the two skills merged, a powerful flaming sword was forged. Melches, witnessing this, shouted in disbelief that it was impossible, while Hinoki anxiously called out Kanaga's name. but Kannagi remained calm, addressing Shijima with a resolute tone, telling him, "Let's finish this." The original skill Kannagi Minato unleashed was called Blazing Fire Cutting Blade. With a single, decisive stroke, he cut through Shijima's skeleton fusion with ease, slicing through the skeleton and Shijima himself. As Shijima fell, Kannagi stood tall, pride and victory gleaming in his eyes as he stared down at his defeated foe. Before the final confrontation, Kannagi recalled Hinoki's words, "Look at the life of your enemy, because every person perceives life differently." For Kannagi, life appeared as a thin thread, something he could sever with his sword. Hinoki had smiled at him and asked, "What does life look like to you?" Now, as the skeleton's hand closed in, ready to crush him, Kannagi raised his sword, contemplating the life before him. Shijima's life seemed like a torch, a disgusting, cloudy flame. Just as he was about to make his final decision, Kannagi hesitated, realizing he needed something more. He resolved to consume that flame with a raging inferno. This realization fueled Kannagi's power, enabling him to slice through the skeleton fusion effortlessly and burn it to ashes. Shijima, witnessing his creation's destruction, stuttered in disbelief, muttering that it was impossible. The founders were equally stunned. Melchas realized that Kannagi had successfully fused her magic with Hinoki's sword technique. Someone nearby questioned whether what Kannagi had done was truly swordsmanship. At that moment, Killick shouted excitedly, declaring that it was indeed fascinating, surprising both Hinoki and Melchas. Killick then exclaimed that Kannagi must be an irregular, capable of switching between and combining various skills in ways that no one had anticipated. What Killick had thought was mere coincidence turned out to be Kannagi's deliberate fusion of two, or possibly more, different skills into one. As Killick spun around in his chair, laughing, Hinoki mused to himself that Killick was indeed a peculiar fellow. Melchas, still processing what she had seen, told Hinoki that if Killick was correct, they might have underestimated Kannagi's potential. She asked if it was really wise for them to continue raising Kannagi in this way. Hinoki, with a smile, assured her that it was perfectly fine. He then asked, "Don't you want to see for yourself how far Kannagi can grow?" After the battle, Kannagi felt the pain in his body and struggled to catch his breath, exhausted. But just then, Shijima, who was half body in the ground, suddenly rose, his blood boiling with anger. Kannagi was shocked, but Shijima merely remarked that it was dangerous. If Kannagi's strike had hit his head, he would have died, and it was a close call. Shijima aimed at Kannagi once more, declaring that it was the end. But before he could strike, a sword flashed through the air, severing Shijima's head. It was Sue, using his Camellia skill. As Shijima's decapitated head fell, he muttered to Sue that he forgot he was still there, but Sue ignored him, rushing to catch Kannagi as he lost consciousness. Shijima, watching this scene in surprise, softened as he recalled holding someone in his arms long ago. Trembling, he whispered to his younger brother, Haru, that it was cold and to just wait until morning, promising to find him food when the sun rose. But Haru didn't respond, he was already dead, and the memory made Shijima snap. In his mind, he heard the sound of a carriage rolling above them while he shivered, trying in vain to keep warm. He could hear people singing and celebrating in the distance, and he wondered, with growing bitterness, why they had to suffer while others rejoiced. As Shijima's head began to disappear, he spoke to Sue with a fading voice, saying that being alone can be fun, but then asking if it's true that it's also lonely. With that, Shijima vanished completely. Sue, after gently laying Shijima's remains down, stood up and began to say, "I'm not lonely, and even if I am alone." But before he could finish, the barrier above them began to crack. Shinomiya and Hinata rushed over to them. Shinomiya, filled with concern, asked if Kannagi was okay and if he was still alive. Sue reassured her, saying that Kannagi's life wasn't in danger, which brought Shinomiya a sense of relief. However, Hinata quickly interrupted, expressing his relief that everyone was safe but warning that they should save the celebration for later. The barrier was collapsing from within. He anxiously asked what would happen if the energy emitted from the village to sustain the barrier exploded. Sue grimly replied that they would be crushed to death for sure if that happened. He stated that when the barrier collapses, they must strike it with their strongest attack to deflect the explosion. Hinata and Shinomiya gathered all their remaining power, while Sue, aware of how dire their situation was, questioned whether they could even succeed in their current weakened state. Despite his doubts, Sue chose to remain optimistic, knowing they had no other choice. Suddenly, Kannagi, still unconscious, raised his sword, startling Sue. Unbeknownst to Sue, it wasn't actually Kannagi. Hinoki was speaking to the sleeping Kannagi, telling him that he did well. Hinoki, recalling Kannagi's request to watch over him, decided to finish the job for him. As the barrier began to crack and explode, Hinoki used his one-handed sword style, splitting Cloud's skill to counter the blast. Meanwhile, the enforcement squad rushed towards them, panicking as they saw the barrier collapsing. The barrier shattered into pieces, and the enforcement team, fearing they were too late, asked their captain if they had failed. The captain replied, "No." They then saw a powerful force piercing through the barrier, a radiant sword's light, shocking everyone. The anti-prophecy unit and the captain of the Sue squad, Sue Makoto, noticed that the sword of light was resolute, without any hesitation, and wondered who could have wielded such power. The next day, in Peruvian airspace, Ikehara asked Makoto if he was saying that the new member had stopped the unknown prophecy. He remarked that it was really impressive. Makoto, who was still in Japan after just defeating a boss, replied that the highest disaster rank they had faced so far was rank 2. Technically, he was facing a rank 1 right now. Ikehara, from his vantage point in the airspace, responded with amazement, noting that it seemed like the team had grown significantly while he wasn't watching over them. Makoto then mentioned that the core member who stopped the prophecy was Kannagi Minato, who had joined them less than 2 days ago. He acknowledged that it was Ikehara who found Kannagi, but he was curious about who Kannagi really was. This made Ikehara smile. He explained that Kannagi was the one who would end all the prophecies and was probably the existence they had been waiting for all this time. Makoto asked if Ikehara had such high expectations for Kannagi. Ikehara suggested that if Makoto was curious, he should meet Kannagi directly. But Makoto, with a slight impatience in his voice, told Ikehara to hurry back already, complaining that without him around, things were getting boring. Ikehara laughed, admitting it was his fault, just as Rin informed him that the target was right in front of them. They then spotted the super-rank prophecy boss, the origin of the suicidal infection, Ishtam. A sound emanated from the airspace, waking Ishtam. Ikehara readied himself, releasing his Divine Wind Turbulence skill, and told Makoto to wait for him because he intended to finish it thoroughly. Meanwhile, Kannagi opened his eyes, startled to find himself in a room. A nurse greeted him when she noticed he was awake. When he asked where he was, she explained that they were at the anti-prophecy infirmary. She mentioned that he had been sleeping since the end of his mission, making him wonder if he had lost consciousness so badly that he couldn't enter the space where the founders were. The nurse then drew back the curtain, commenting that since he looked fine, there was nothing to worry about. She told him to call if he needed anything. To Kanaga's surprise, Sue was behind the curtain, watching over him the whole time. Kannagi looked around, asking Sue where Hinata and Shinomiya were. Sue replied that they had been training since their return, frustrated by their perceived uselessness. Sue then added that Kannaga's power was overwhelming in other areas, leaving Kannagi confused. Sue stood up, walked closer, and demanded to know who Kannagi really was. He pointed out that in less than 2 days, Kannagi had defeated a rank 3 boss and potentially a rank 1 boss. Sue also mentioned that he had never seen or heard of anyone using the type of skills Kannagi possessed, and pressed him for answers. Kannagi, however, was just as confused as Sue, which only angered Sue more. He was about to angrily shout at Kannagi, demanding to know how he could be so strong, when suddenly the curtain opened, and Makoto entered, apologizing for interrupting, shocking them both. Makoto asked, "Are you Kannagi Minato?" Kannagi stutteringly replied, "Yes," while wondering who this person was. Sue called Makoto his big brother, but Makoto ignored him and walked past, only glancing back to see Sue all bandaged up. Just as Kannagi was about to speak, Makoto suddenly swung his sword at him. The blade cut deeply into the wall, shocking Sue, who stared at his brother in disbelief. Fortunately, Kannagi jumped away just in time to dodge the attack and angrily asked Makoto if this was some kind of test. Makoto, knowing that a normal trainee wouldn't have been able to dodge it, replied that it was indeed a test, and that Kannagi had passed. This both surprised and confused Kannagi. Makoto then introduced himself as the captain of the Sue squad. Kannagi looked at Sue, remembering that Sue had called Makoto his brother. Makoto then informed Kannagi that, considering the results of his feats during the potential rank 1 disaster, he would be temporarily joining the Sue squad. This announcement shocked Kannagi and left Sue in disbelief, as he couldn't believe that his big brother Makoto, the captain of the squad, was directly inviting Kannagi, especially when Sue himself hadn't been allowed to join. Makoto then walked out of the clinic, telling Kannagi that they would be starting the briefing, and that he should follow him. Kannagi replied with a hesitant yes, while worriedly looking back at Sue, who stood silently, gripping his hand tightly until it bled in anger, whispering Kanaga's name repeatedly. Meanwhile, in the anti-prophecy training area, Hinata and Shinomiya were training together. They had been working hard for hours, surrounded by a swarm of weapons. Shinomiya expressed her frustration, saying that no matter how much they trained, they wouldn't be able to reach Kanaga's level, which only fueled their determination. Suddenly, someone cheerfully barged in and greeted them. It was Ikehara. He announced his return and mentioned that he had brought souvenirs from Peru. He offered them chocolates and rugs made from alpaca fur, but his souvenirs were sent flying when Shinomiya excitedly shouted his name. Both she and Hinata rushed to him, eagerly asking how long he would stay in Japan. Ikehara replied that he might stay for about a week. Determined, they asked Ikehara to train them because they didn't want to fall behind Kannagi. This surprised Ikehara, who hadn't expected to see such blazing determination in their eyes. He realized that Kanagi's influence had reached them too. He praised them and then asked about Sue, sensing his presence behind him. Sue, who had been listening, took off his bandage and replied that he would be joining the training as well because he refused to be left behind by Kannagi. All this occurred while Kannagi was following Makoto, unaware of what was happening in the training area. Everyone is confused by Sue's statement, so he elaborates, explaining that Kannagi is being scouted by his older brother, the captain of the Sue squad, and that Kannagi will be joining them as a temporary member. Shinomiya and Hinata are stunned by this revelation, unable to believe that Kannagi has advanced so far already. Ikehara then recalls advising Makoto that if he was curious, he should meet Kannagi directly. Sue, however, laments that this situation arose because he is lacking compared to Kannagi. Meanwhile, in the hallway, Kannagi asks Makoto what kind of briefing they're heading to. Makoto replies that it concerns their next mission and that they'll be departing tomorrow morning. Makoto suddenly stops and, with a serious tone, calls Kannagi by name, asking if he is close to Sue. Although Kannagi has known Sue for less than 2 days, he reflects on their recent battle against Shijima, during which Sue lent him his sword and stayed by his side while he was unconscious. Considering this, Kannagi responds that they are indeed close, to which Makoto simply replies, "I see." Back in the training area, Sue confides in the others, saying that his brother Makoto doesn't care about him at all, but he quickly adds that Makoto is truly concerned for Sue. Sue shares that just moments ago, Makoto couldn't even meet his gaze, and Makoto explains that it's because he can't bear to see Sue's injuries. Frustrated, Sue shouts that the only way for Makoto to truly see him is for him to risk his life and grow stronger. But Makoto counters, saying that Sue doesn't need to be that strong, he just wants him to be safe. Kannagi then insists to Makoto that they are very close brothers, and Makoto agrees, stating it's a given. Sue turns to Ikehara, Shinomiya, and Hinata, declaring that he must surpass Kannagi to earn Makoto's acknowledgement. Makoto reiterates that he genuinely cares about his little brother, but Sue defiantly shouts that he will definitely defeat Makoto one day. Kannagi witnessed this, thinks they have beautiful brotherly bond, unaware that the brothers' words reveal a deep misunderstanding between them. A moment later, in the training area, Shinomiya remarks to Hinata that Sue has never opened up about himself before. She then asks if it's possible that Sue's desire to grow stronger is just a manifestation of him being a Brocken. Hinata questions her if she really thinks that, and she responds that Sue clearly has the talent and drive to compete passionately against Makoto. When asked if Sue hates Makoto, Shinomiya imagines that Sue would scream that he respects Makoto. As they talk, Shinomiya suddenly attacks Hinata, stating that Sue simply wants to earn his older brother Makoto's attention. Hinata dodges her strikes and comments that it's a touching story. Meanwhile, on the other side of the room, Sue is furiously attempting to land a hit on Ikehara, who is casually eating chocolate from Peru. Hinata, observing this, then asks Shinomiya if it really is such a touching story after all. The 3 rules of the Sue squad are simple. First, be swift. Second, maintain your offensive. And third, overcome your weaknesses. Within the combatant forces, the Sue squad is considered the strongest among the anti-prophecy units, primarily due to their exceptional combat abilities. The number of members is fixed at a minimum of 7, aiming to be a small but elite force, with their main targets being rank 1 and above prophecy. Koriyama Takeru, a member of the Sue squad, explains to Kannagi that what he was told, and their captain Makoto carries about 90% of the squad's firepower. The rest of them are basically just extras. Since he's only a temporary member, he doesn't need to worry and their captain will finish things in an instant. While Kannagi listens, typing quickly on his phone as Takeru talks. Frustrated, Takeru shouts at him to at least put down his phone. Kannagi stutters an apology, explaining that he needs to contact his friends. When Takeru asks if he just said friends, Kannagi replies yes and clarifies that everyone keeps nagging him. By everyone, he means the founders are trying to communicate with him, leaving Takeru baffled. Later, in the training area, Hinata, Shinomiya, and Sue all receive a message from Kannagi. Shinomiya reads hers and, visibly annoyed, shouts, "Who the hell does Kannagi think he is?" Hinata, however, just laughs at the message, while Sue fumes with anger, demanding to know what Kannagi is thinking. Ikehara, curious, asks what's going on, and they all show him Kannagi's messages. Ikehara reads them aloud. Each one is a piece of advice meant to help them improve. He chuckles and comments that the advice is actually good. Then, he notices something remarkable. The advice is detailed and specifically tailored to each of the 3 of them, at a level that suggests Kannagi has been observing them closely. Ikehara then tells the group that they've received such wonderful presents and asks whether they plan to accept them or perhaps reject them. Hanada replies that he's going to accept, prompting Shinomiya to shout that she will too. Meanwhile, Sue, fuming with anger, screams that he'll make Kannagi regret it for sure, as he believes Kannagi was essentially aiding his enemy. However, Ikehara reminds Sue that Kannagi's gesture was not one of enmity, but of friendship. With a smirk, Ikehara tells Kannagi to prepare himself, causing Kannagi to sneeze. Takeru then points out that they can already see something from where they are. As he wipes the fog from the window, he is surprised to see the towering, snow-covered peaks of the mountains, a rank 1 prophecy, frozen Earth. It's a disaster that could freeze the entire surface of the Earth. The scale of the catastrophe keeps expanding, and the affected area is expected to grow exponentially. If left unchecked, the whole planet could be encased in ice in the near future, leading to a dangerously dire situation. Kashiai Mana, the vice captain of Sue's squad, explains that the disaster is currently unfolding at 17 different locations around the world simultaneously. In some countries, the phenomenon is wreaking havoc by appearing in urban areas. Fortunately, it has manifested in a remote region this time, which is considered a stroke of luck. However, the spread is faster than reported, and they cannot afford any delay. Makoto steps into the middle of the group, informing them that they've reached the closest point the helicopter can take them. He tells them they'll be descending directly from the back hatch. He then reminds them to avoid causing any damage to nearby human settlements and orders them to chant the 3 rules of Sue's squad. In unison, they recite, first, be swift, second, maintain the offensive, and third, overcome your weaknesses. As Makoto silently reflects on the recent battle with Shijima, he recalls how he had to rely on Hinoki once again. He knows that during this temporary enlistment, he'll have a rare opportunity to learn from the regular members. Determined, he swears that this time, he will complete the mission with his own hands. With resolve, he jumps out of the aircraft. This was Kannagi's first encounter with a rank 1 prophecy, and during this mission, he was about to experience a regret so profound that it would haunt him for the rest of his life. 10:17 AM, the location where Sue's squad landed. Takeru, shivering uncontrollably, exclaimed that it was unbearably cold. He asked if he was right in thinking that Awakeners were supposed to be resilient against temperature changes. Mana informed them that it was -37 degrees Celsius, far colder than the reports had indicated. She also mentioned that their investigation area was vast, and they might have to set up camp midway. Meanwhile, Makoto stared blankly at the cold landscape. Kannagi then asked Takeru if the frozen earth was mentioned in any prophecy book. Takeru shook his head, explaining that the frozen earth was something predicted by someone from the anti-prophecy unit using a skill. There are many prophecies, but this was the first time they had identified a rank 1 prophecy, which is why Sue's squad was chosen for this mission due to its severity. Kannagi nodded in understanding. Sensing Kannagi's unease, Mana asked if he was nervous and reassured him that being nervous was better than letting his guard down, though he shouldn't carry too much weight on his shoulders. Takeru placed a hand on Kannagi's shoulder, agreeing with Mana, and encouraged him to relax. He reminded Kannagi that there are 8 regular squads in the Japanese anti-prophecy unit, but Sue's squad, which only handles rank 1 and above, is the best. Just then, Mana shouted at Takeru not to be too relaxed, prompting Takeru to playfully apologize, admitting it was his mistake. Suddenly, Takeru detected enemy presence on his radar. He released a bright light from his finger, startling Kannagi. Reporting quickly, he indicated that the enemies were at 2 o'clock, about 200 meters away. Mana acknowledged this and disappeared at lightning speed, leaving Kannagi in shock at how swiftly she vanished. In less than a minute, Mana reappeared beside Makoto, reporting that she found approximately 30 monsters at the location Takeru pointed out. The monsters were classified as S3+ Ice Tribe Ice Gargoyles. Makoto immediately ordered their annihilation, to which Mana responded with a crisp Roger, and commanded the squad to attack. They quickly engaged the gargoyles, defeating them with ease. Kannagi stood in stunned amazement, recognizing the team's superior situational awareness and flawless teamwork, on a completely different level from that of trainees like him. Just as Kannagi was about to say something, he was cut off by Makoto, who told him that enemies classified as S3+ weren't a problem for him and ordered him to join the fight. Kannagi confidently responded, yes, and rushed to assist the team. A moment later, he jumped and delivered a powerful kick to the monster's head, shattering it into pieces. However, the monster's severed hand, still gripping a sword, moved behind him. Mana shouted a warning just as the hand attempted to slash at the squad members with incredible speed. Fortunately, they managed to block the attack in time. Mana then shouted to the team, alerting them that some powerful monsters were mixed in with the rest. Activating his blazing fire-cutting blade, he caught the monster's attention and swiftly slashed it in half, which took Takeru by surprise. When Takeru looked back, he saw the flaming sword approaching him from a distance, leaving him shocked. Mana, however, just looked on proudly. Meanwhile, Makoto moved with incredible speed, effortlessly slashing through a horde of gargoyles surrounding him. As he fought, he realized that the source of the blue light from earlier had been Kannagi. As the sun set, they set up an ice camp. Takeru scouted the area for safety. Mana asked Takeru how the situation looked, but he replied that it was futile, at least the boss wasn't within a 10-kilometer range. She suggested they spend the night there and asked where Kannagi and Makoto were. Outside by the firewood, Kannagi was staring at his hands, closing his eyes as he remembered how he had grasped the concept of fusing skills during his battle against Shijima. He thought he should be able to do the same with another skill, and he began to concentrate, telling himself he could definitely do it. Just as he was about to merge the skills, Makoto appeared behind him, startling him with his sudden presence. Makoto asked if he had disturbed him, and Kannagi, stuttering, replied no, but admitted that Makoto had really scared him by approaching so quietly. Makoto then asked if this was Kannagi's first camp, to which Kannagi confirmed it was. Makoto inquired if it was tough, and Kannagi replied that he was managing fine. Makoto then said he really wanted to go home, even if just for a second, leaving Kannagi puzzled. When Kannagi asked why, Makoto responded that he missed smoking his cat, causing Kannagi to look at him in confusion. Makoto repeated that he missed smoking his cat, and as he reminisced about sniffing his cat, he shyly covered his face. This left Kannagi in shock, asking if Makoto was talking about drugs. Kannagi was surprised to learn that Makoto had a cat and curiously asked what kind of cat it was. Makoto then sat down close to him, showing him a video on his phone. The closeness surprised Kannagi, but when he saw the video of the cat, he couldn't help but say it was cute. He asked Makoto what the cat's name was, to which Makoto replied, Oribe Manju, leaving Kannagi puzzled by the unusual name. Looking at the pictures, Kannagi noticed that the cat always seemed to have an angry expression. He asked Makoto if he really missed his cat, to which Makoto replied with a laugh, not at all. He explained that no matter where he laid down, his clothes were always covered in fur, the walls, and even he, were full of scratch marks. Makoto added that Oribe also vomits hairballs and hates being hugged, making everyday life difficult. Despite this, Makoto found the cat's aloofness endearing, saying Oribe was like someone who couldn't open his heart, which he thought was cute, just like Sue. This left Kannagi wondering if everyone who liked cats was as eccentric as Makoto. Makoto then wished he could talk with Sue as easily as he did with Oribe. Kannagi stared at him for a moment before suggesting that, since he was an only child, he might not fully understand Makoto's feelings. Still, he advised Makoto to try treating Sue the same way he treated Oribe. Makoto was taken aback by the suggestion but then smiled, admitting that Kannagi was right. As they continued watching videos on Makoto's phone, Kannagi was shocked to hear Makoto sweetly telling Oribe how cute he was and offering him snacks, only for Oribe to bite his hand in response. Kannagi asked in disbelief if Makoto was treating his cat like a baby. Makoto responded by asking if that was really so strange, then, with a more serious tone, asked Kannagi if he could practice talking with him. Kannagi was about to decline when Mana appeared, calling them back to camp because they would be departing early the next morning. Makoto acknowledged her with a playful meow, leaving Mana stunned and unable to believe what she just heard. That night, neither Kannagi nor the Siu squad knew that a mysterious figure was making his way toward the same mountain. A man with an open shirt was being stopped by someone who warned him that he'd die if he entered the mountain dressed like that. The person asked if the man was an Awakener and if he was there on a mission. The man simply replied, yes, explaining that he was there to fulfill the prophecy of that place, an important mission. Little did anyone know that a lone Awakener was heading toward the same treacherous mountain. Later, in Kannagi Minato's realm, while he slept, his training for the day focused on archery to improve his concentration. Margit reminded Kannagi that it had been almost 25 hours, cautioning him that he never knew when his enemy might come. He asked if it was painful and explained the reason behind maintaining such intense focus as he stood sweating, holding a bow with an arrow drawn. Hinoki loudly questioned why today's training wasn't swordsmanship, but Melchias quickly silenced him, reminding him that he had his turn yesterday. Despite this, Hinoki continued to curse, though Margit noted that Kannagi remained undisturbed by the noise. He praised him, observing that his concentration had improved significantly since their first session. Kannagi, still holding his bow, admitted that he was now working with an incredible team and wanted to give his best. Suddenly, a target appeared at high speed, and without hesitation, he released the arrow, hitting the target dead center. Margit praised him for a job well done, and Kannagi exhaled in relief. He reminded him not to forget the feeling he had in that moment and decided to end the day's training. Exhausted, he collapsed onto the floor, stuttering as he thanked him. Hinoki rushed over, asking if it was finally over, then drew his sword, suggesting they continue training until it was time to wake up. Early in the morning, Makoto woke everyone up, his eyes dark with exhaustion from training. He announced that today was the day they would find and defeat the prophesized boss. On the second day of their expedition on Frozen Earth, Takeru shouted for everyone to look ahead. At a distance of about 150 meters, they saw around 20 monsters. Mana quickly ordered everyone to spread out and engage, while an ice tribe bluebird, estimated to be high-ranking, flew overhead, preparing to attack. In the realm, the founders were watching. Eilerson, the founder of Feet of Light, remarked that the mission seemed easy. Lilac, the founder of Flipper, responded, noting the strength of Kanagi's companions and suggesting that it wouldn't end as disastrously as their previous mission. Melchas noticed the silence of Kudu, the god of hands, and asked what was on his mind. Kudu admitted he wasn't sure, but something felt off as he watched Kannagi assist in defeating the bluebird monsters. A moment later, Mana reported to Makoto that they had cleared the area. Makoto praised them and asked Takeru for an update. Takeru replied that a large energy signature, likely the boss, was detected about 2,000 meters ahead and was heading their way. Suddenly, something massive appeared in the distance. Takeru, standing at the front, reported that enemy contact was imminent in 10 seconds, beginning a countdown as the boss growled loudly. In mere seconds, the boss, an unknown god named Kamedes, appeared before them, wielding multiple swords and seething with anger. Its rank was unknown, but Mana sensed that its aura was far different from the trash mobs they had faced before. She ordered everyone to attack, and they vanished around Makoto at lightning speed. Takeru quickly launched his light string, wrapping it around Kamedes' arms to restrain it, shouting 1. Mana followed up by slicing Kamedes' feet with her sword, shouting 2. The other men activated a magic circle, shouting 3. As they unleashed powerful flames to burn Kamedes. To their shock, the attack left no mark on the boss. Kannagi then leapt into the air, ready to launch his own attack. As he prepared, he recalled Hinoki's advice, against a strong opponent, never hesitate. In that split second, he had to forget everything, his fear, his doubts, and focus only on the life of his enemy. Hinoki had also told him to always use his strongest attack first, giving the enemy no chance to counter. With renewed confidence, Kannagi activated his blazing fire-cutting blade and slashed at Kamedes without hesitation, knowing it was his strongest technique. However, to his surprise, the attack only left a small scratch. Kamedes retaliated, swinging its sword towards Kannagi with immense force. Kannagi tried to block it, but the strike was too powerful, slamming him hard into the ground. Takeru, concerned, called out to see if he was still alive. Kannagi sat up, grateful that an icicle behind him had softened the blow. Kannagi realized that Kamedes was far too strong. Mana and the others jumped back, understanding why the prophecy ranked it as their #1 threat. Mana called out to her captain, telling him they were counting on him. Makoto stepped forward calmly and told the team not to worry about him. Takeru quickly wrapped Makoto with his string, dragging him back while shouting that they were disengaging to avoid getting in the way of their captain. Kamedes raised one of her swords and swung it down towards Makoto, causing a loud explosion. Takeru called out in concern, but both he and Kamedes were shocked when Makoto, completely unscathed, responded calmly. He sees that she's indeed strong. The tip of his sword had not only stopped Kamedes' attack but also cracked her weapon. Takeru, though shocked, remarked that it was no surprise. Meanwhile, Mana screamed. They said the Sioux squad was a one-man army, which made Kannagi realize the full meaning behind her earlier worries. Kamedes swung at Makoto once again, but Makoto effortlessly blocked the attack. With a swift motion, he slashed through 2 of Kamedes' arms. The god screamed in pain as Hinoki watched from the realm, thinking to himself that Makoto was impressive, especially for an Awakener from the modern era. Hinoki menacingly muttered that he wished he could fight, but Makoto shouted back at him, declaring that he wasn't going to lend his body. Makoto then turned to the now armless Kamedes, saying ideally, he wanted everyone on the squad to gain experience fighting a boss like her, but it looks like he'll have to finish this himself. Mana quickly ordered the team to deploy a barrier, which they did without delay. Makoto then unleashed his powerful Red Dragon God Emperor skill, engulfing the area in intense flames. Thanks to the barrier, the squad remained unharmed. Makoto followed this by activating his Crimson Light skill, sending a devastating attack directly toward Kamedes. The god screamed in agony as the attack hit, leaving half of her body severed and engulfed in flames. Kannagi, watching from the sidelines, was in awe. He knew Makoto's sword wielded flames, but this power was far beyond his own. Without the barrier, they would have been reduced to ashes. For the first time, Kannagi truly understood the power of the captain of the Sioux squad. Makoto apologized to Kamedes, explaining that it was their duty to protect the world. But then, to everyone's surprise, Makoto let out a soft meow. Mana was stunned, while Kannagi was horrified, realizing that Makoto's head was completely conquered by his cat. Kannagi admired Makoto's sword style, which was entirely different from Hinoki's. Makoto's techniques were leagues above his own, and Kannagi felt an urge to learn more from him. With a final, decisive swing, Makoto raised his sword and sliced Komedes in half, completely defeating the unknown god. The team erupted in cheers at their victory, but suddenly, Makoto's arm was severed without warning. Shocked, he turned to see a hole pierced through the barrier and into Takeru's chest. Kannagi stood frozen in disbelief, watching as Takeru fell. Before he could react, one by one, the others were attacked with terrifying speed, killed before his eyes. Paralyzed by confusion and horror, Kannagi could do nothing but watch the chaos unfold. Kannagi snapped and rushed towards Takeru, but Takeru called him an idiot and pushed him away as another attack severed Takeru's remaining hand. Kannagi, shocked, stumbled back, watching in horror. Takeru cursed under his breath, frustrated that his radar couldn't detect the attack. He reached out towards his captain, Makoto, and apologized before collapsing. However, Takeru died with a smile, confident that Makoto had now located their enemy, which only fueled Makoto's anger. Suddenly, another energy ball struck Hisano in the side and neck, killing him instantly. Makoto shouted for everyone to hide among the terrain, warning that they were under a powerful skill-based attack. The team scattered in panic, but Kannagi remained kneeling on the ground, staring in disbelief at Takeru and Hisano's lifeless bodies. Meanwhile, an injured man hid with Mana, who was seething with anger. He noticed that Makoto's arm was gone. Makoto understood that the enemy's attack was one that couldn't be stopped, even by barriers. The nature of the skill seemed to annihilate everything it touched. Determined, Makoto figured out where the attack was coming from and dashed forward at incredible speed. Mana, shocked and worried, called out for him to stop. But Komedes suddenly regenerated, its body reforming in front of them. Panic set in for Mana as she struggled to believe that a regenerating boss could appear at such a critical moment. Turning to Kannagi, Mana urged him to help defeat the boss, asking if he could move. But to her shock, Kannagi remained in the same position, kneeling in silence. He stutteringly called out to Valentine, pleading for someone to save or resurrect his fallen comrades, while fixated on the corpses before him. Valentine apologized, explaining that no matter what skills she used, she couldn't bring the dead back to life. Kannagi acknowledged this, but his voice wavered as he called out to Hinoki, Wantek, Eiler, and all the founders within him. They appeared before him, answering his call. He remembered his previous battle against Bandu, where he had relied on Hinoki in the end. Swearing to himself that this time, he would complete the mission on his own. He hesitated and apologized, pleading for their help. Hinoki simply responded with a quiet, "I understand." Kannagi then lost consciousness, his body unmoving, but his hair began to turn a pale shade. Meanwhile, Makoto sped forward, analyzing the situation. He realized that the enemy's attack had pierced through Takeru's detection field, which had a range of about 3 kilometers. This meant the attack came from beyond that distance. Makoto also knew that the strike that killed Takeru and severed his own arm was a single, powerful attack. In short, their enemy was as strong as he was. Normally, Makoto suppressed his power to allow his squad to grow, but with his speed and keen eyesight, he could now easily pinpoint the enemy's location, more than 3 kilometers away, even through obstacles. Makoto thought back to Takeru, Hisano, Kawase, and Muromi, all of whom had fallen in this battle. He swore to himself that their sacrifices would not be in vain. With a determined release of his Crimson Light skill, flames surged forward, burning and slashing through the crystal ice that had been blocking his way. As the ice shattered, a dark magic ball floated ominously before him, and a man emerged from the shadows, acknowledging Makoto's ability to locate and attack so swiftly, impressed but also mocking. Makoto's attention quickly shifted as he realized his flames had been absorbed by the dark magic. The man taunted him, hinting that had his left arm still been intact, the outcome might have been far different, perhaps fatal. Emerging from his hiding place beneath the ice, the man faced Makoto directly, brushing off the seriousness of the encounter as if it were just a hypothetical scenario. Without wasting any time, the man unleashed several dark magic balls in Makoto's direction. Makoto, quickly regaining his footing, swung his sword back and hit the snow to create a diversion. The man was taken aback as Makoto successfully blocked his assault. Then, in an impressive display of speed, Makoto appeared behind him, attempting to slash his head with a decisive blow. To Makoto's shock, his sword was cleanly severed in half, and at the same moment, a sharp pain erupted from a wound on his side. The man seemed amused, commenting on how Makoto had likely believed he had the upper hand. However, it was clear that the tables had turned. Makoto, now on his knees, fought through the pain, his anger simmering beneath the surface. Determined not to give up, he attempted another strike, but the man easily evaded the attack, stepping aside with minimal effort. Taking advantage of the moment, the man delivered a forceful kick to Makoto's wounded side, sending a fresh wave of pain coursing through him. Makoto coughed up blood, yet with an unexpected resolve, he used the back of his sword to strike the man square in the chest, sending him hurtling into a nearby block of ice, which shattered on impact. Taking a moment to catch his breath, Makoto then asks the man why he went easy on him and points out that while firing those shots earlier, the man stopped after only a few, even though his skill should have been able to annihilate everything it touched. He adds that, no matter how he thinks about it, the power of the man's attack is too overwhelming to use continuously. He tells the man that if they are talking about attrition, they are both in the same position. The man gets up and tells him he was right, but they're not standing at the same position, because he was at the disadvantage right now. Makoto then recalls his squad and tells the man that the third rule of the Sui squad is to overcome their weaknesses. He releases a strong flame, surprising the man as Makoto burns his wounds close to stop the bleeding. Makoto repeats to the man that the third rule is to overcome weakness, and then activates his Red Dragon God Emperor Scarlet Blaze skill. The man releases more Dark Orb, understanding that Makoto intends to burn his own life force as he is doing the same. As the man uses his Darkness skill, Makoto calls out to his squad, telling them to watch him, and shouts at the man to never look down on the Sui squad. Meanwhile, in the front, the unknown god Komedes let out a loud growl as Mana and the others stood ready to face it. Mana quickly realized that Komedes was still far too powerful for her to subdue alone. Desperate, she called out to Kannagi, who remained kneeling in the distance. She couldn't help but think that Kannagi's fighting spirit had completely faded after witnessing the deaths of Takeru and the others. It made sense to her. After all, Kannagi had only recently been an ordinary person before joining the anti-prophecy movement and becoming a hunter. But to her astonishment, she saw Kannagi rise to his feet, collecting himself. Just as she was about to call out to him, he suddenly dashed toward Komedes at incredible speed, attacking it with a powerful kick. With Eilerson's assistance, Kannagi managed to take down Komedes in an instant, leaving Mana stunned. As he walked away from the scene, a glowing yellow light radiated behind him. The founders standing nearby reassured Kannagi, telling him to leave the rest to them. Meanwhile, 4 kilometers away, Makoto and the man continued their tense standoff. Makoto raised his sword and unleashed his Scarlet Light Blade skill at the man. Although the man dodged the attacks with ease at first, he soon realized that the flames, which should have been extinguished, were re-emerging. The man knew his control over the darkness had its limits and that suppressing the flames was becoming increasingly difficult. Thinking quickly, the man launched dark balls at Makoto, but Makoto skillfully dodged them and seized the opportunity to move in. With a swift motion, Makoto managed to slice off the man's right arm, yelling that their positions had now reversed. However, the man, unfazed, taunted him, suggesting that it might not be so simple. In retaliation, the man landed a vicious kick to Makoto's wounded side, causing him to scream in agony and cough up blood. The intense pain brought Makoto down to the ground. As he lay there, the man approached confidently, stating that losing one arm wouldn't change the outcome of the battle, especially when Makoto still had a gaping wound in his stomach. The man continued, revealing that he had anticipated Makoto's strategy from the start. After gaining control over the darkness, he knew Makoto would come and attempt to force a close combat fight. Though he acknowledged Makoto's strength and decisiveness, he remarked that Makoto's actions had been predictable. This, he claimed, was why he would ultimately lose. Reaching into his bag, the man pulled out an object as he explained that Makoto's defeat had been preordained from the beginning, according to a certain book. As he revealed the book with a sinister grin, Makoto was shocked and immediately recognized it. He demanded to know if the man was holding the Book of Doom. The man didn't bother answering, instead opening the book with a creepy smile. The man coldly explained that while there existed an organization dedicated to opposing prophecies, there was also another group whose goal was to ensure that those prophecies were fulfilled. Makoto was stunned upon hearing the man's revelation and even more shocked when the man introduced himself as one of the 12 Apostles of the Apocalypse, a group known as the 12 of the Darkness. With confidence, the man declared that he would be the one to fulfill the prophecy. Makoto asked if the man's goal was to bring about the prophesied destruction, and for what reason, but the man merely asked in return if Makoto would forgive him if he told him the answer. Frustrated by the cryptic response, Makoto slashed at the man in a burst of speed, shouting that it was nonsense. His attack landed, cutting the man's ear and shoulder. Makoto felt a surge of confidence, thinking he could win. The man was nearly out of mana and should no longer be able to use his skills, and his body must be reaching its limit. Believing victory was within reach, Makoto unleashed his Red Dragon skill. However, the man smirked, taunting Makoto, claiming this would be his end. Reaching into his bag, the man pulled out a potion and immediately opened it. A bright light erupted from the bottle, forcing Makoto to shield his face with his arm. In the next instant, the man's fist shot out of the light, striking Makoto in the face with immense force. The blow slammed Makoto into a block of ice behind him. Dazed, he looked at the man in confusion, unable to comprehend how the man's severed right arm had been restored. The man explained that it was thanks to an artifact, admitting he hadn't wanted to use it due to its rarity and precious value, but felt he had no choice against him. The man dashed toward him again. Makoto immediately swung his scarlet light blade in an attempt to keep him at bay, but the man effortlessly cut through the attack with his dark magic balls and pinned Makoto against the wall. The man then began to rain punches on Makoto's head. As the relentless blows continued, Makoto couldn't believe what was happening, realizing that the man had completely recovered. Makoto knew that artifacts were highly powerful items from the era of the Old Tower, typically controlled by nations because of how overpowered they were. No organization should be able to use such items freely. Yet here he was, at the mercy of an artifact-wielding enemy. The man delivered another brutal kick to Makoto's side, causing blood to splatter everywhere as Makoto collapsed helplessly onto the ground. The man approached, gloating that Makoto had finally fallen. But despite his injuries and overwhelming hopelessness, Makoto refused to give up. He reached for his broken sword, determined that he could still win. His mind flashed back to his parents, Sue, the organization, and his team, reminding him of the responsibilities and unfinished business he still had. He also remembered a recent conversation with Kannagi, where Kannagi had remarked that, as a single child, Makoto might not fully understand the feeling of family. Kannagi had suggested that Makoto try treating Sue the same way he treated his beloved cat, Oribe. Makoto smiled at the thought, realizing Kannagi had been right. With renewed hope, he grabbed his sword, thinking about giving Oribe to his younger brother Sue, hoping it might bring them closer. Gathering his resolve, Makoto lifted his sword, preparing for one final attack. But before he could swing it, a dark ball severed both his arm and his sword. The man, unfazed, summoned a swarm of dark balls, ready to deliver the final blow. As he coldly said goodbye, Makoto knelt, defeated, waiting for death. His thoughts drifted to Sue in what seemed like his final moments. Suddenly, the massive block of ice behind the man exploded, splitting in half. Someone emerged from the icy destruction. Tears fell onto Kanaga's hand as he clenched his fist in anger. Hinoki's voice rang out, calling the man by name, furiously demanding to know if he was responsible for making their disciple cry. Behind Hinoki, the other founders stood, equally enraged. Makoto looked at Kannagi, wondering if the sudden surge of power was truly from him. However, when he saw the overwhelming energy radiating from Kannagi, he quickly realized it wasn't the same Kannagi he knew. The man facing them also noticed the shift. Kannagi was no longer the helpless boy the man could harm at will. This new presence was something far more dangerous, something that demanded caution. Realizing the threat, the man chose to resort to intimidation. The man quickly summoned a dark ball, shouting a warning to Kannagi not to move, threatening to kill Makoto if he did. But before he could finish his threat, the man's arm was severed cleanly, leaving him in shock. He hadn't taken his eyes off Kannagi, yet he had no idea when or how his arm had been cut. Staring in disbelief, the man could only watch as blood dripped from his wound. Hinoki observed the scene and noted to the other founders that, as expected, Kanaga's sword was dull. Killick responded, agreeing that he didn't expect the blade to last more than a single strike. Killick then activated his power, summoning his Trismegistus skill, which transmuted various types of equipment. He announced to everyone that he would create weapons for them and urged them to show the man no mercy. The man, still reeling from his shock, restored his arm, causing Hinoki to question if the severed limb had regenerated. Melchus stepped in, explaining that it was not a simple regeneration, but a reversal technique. She hadn't expected a modern awakened one to possess such a skill, and she suspected the ability was connected to the artifact the man was using. According to Melchus, the artifact would allow him to continuously recover from any wound, but there should be a limit to how many times it could restore his injuries. At that moment, the man was struck in the forehead by an arrow, which came from Margit, who agreed with Melchus' assessment. However, the man recovered the wound on his forehead with startling speed. Wantak asked Melchus for advice on how to counter it, and she replied that they would need to keep killing the man continuously. Eventually, he would succumb. The man prepared to release another wave of dark magic balls, but before he could, Margit fired a volley of arrows. The arrows pierced through the dark magic balls before they could fully form, and Margit managed to hit the man in one eye and twice in the chest. The man staggered and fell to the ground as Margit angrily berated him for leaving so many openings. The man cursed in frustration while his body quickly regenerated the injuries. He then unleashed another attack, aiming dark magic balls directly at Kannagi. In response, Wantak took over Kannagi's body, effortlessly dodging each of the dark balls with incredible speed. Seizing the opportunity, Wontak grabbed the man's hand and delivered a powerful kick to his chin, followed by a palm strike directly to the man's face. Wontak, continuing his relentless assault, repeatedly struck the man's head, all the while informing the other founders that the man's skill could indeed annihilate anything it touched. While powerful, the skill was only effective upon impact, and the man couldn't use it properly if his vision was obstructed. Dodging the dark balls was mere easy task. Striking the man in the stomach, the man was sent flying a considerable distance away. Wontek then asks how many times the man has died, but Eilerson replies by asking if there's any point in counting. Kannagi approaches Makoto, who is still kneeling, and Makoto asks if he is Kannagi. Valentine, having taken over Kannagi's body, replies that she is not Kannagi. She then uses her preservation skill to heal Makoto's injuries and tells him that they are the founders, dwelling inside Kannagi Minato's body as heroic spirits. Valentine quickly dashes away, telling Makoto they are in a hurry. Makoto realizes that those inside Kannagi are the founders. The man stands up after being slammed and can't believe that his darkness balls were dodged so easily. He calls Kannagi a damn monster and tries to run away, but a sharp object appears in front of him, and a spear pierces through his heart. The man screaming in pain, realizing he doesn't have time to think. Shimer asks Melchius if the man will continue dying if left like this, but Melchius replies no. The man quickly heals his heart and wounds, emerging from the spear, prompting Shimer to say he understands. Suddenly, a bright golden light appears above the man, and Eilerson crushes him to the ground with his foot, saying it's annoying. Eilerson wonders aloud from which part of the man's body he would regenerate if they destroy him completely. The man's body is in pieces, but it regenerates, and he comes back to life. He dashes away, thinking he can't let Kannagi stop him and planning to escape after killing Makoto. However, when the man reaches the place where Makoto was left, he is horrified to see Kannagi waiting for him, telling him he's late. The man panics as Hinoki, who now possesses Kannagi's body, stands up and tells Makoto to watch carefully. Hinoki slashes the man into pieces with lightning speed, cutting him like paper. Despite his resolve to fulfill the prophecies and lack of fear of death, the man falters in the face of this overwhelming abnormality, realizing that the fear he had cast aside was closer than he thought. As the man's body recovers, he grabs something from his bag, thinking he must overcome his fear. Hinoki notices and swiftly swings his sword, cutting off the man's arm. However, the artifact the man had activated traps Kannagi inside the sand cage of time. Hinoki observes that the man's arm is not regenerating and continues to bleed, signaling the end of his regeneration ability. The man, however, is relieved, knowing he barely succeeded in using the artifact. Melchius tells everyone the cage was created by that artifact and activates her power, asking the founders what they should do next. Hinoki stares at the man and, seeing his arm still lying on the ground, announces that the man's regeneration skill is finally over. The man tells Kannagi not to worry because even his darkness cannot destroy the cage, meaning neither of them can kill the other. As the man prepares to speak about the outcome of their battle, Hinoki interrupts, saying he has been watching him closely. He then calls Makoto, who is standing behind the man. The man glances back in fear, seeing Makoto radiating a powerful aura, staring intensely at him. Makoto then remembers Ikehara asking if he was also a genius like him, and if it wouldn't be better to search for a master who could teach him. Following the world's strongest awakens advice, Makoto sought out a master. He became a disciple of several people at that level, but each master told him they had nothing left to teach him, he had already surpassed them. They suggested he look for another master, as he had made them realize he was just a normal human. Every master he met gave up on him in less than a month, or sometimes just a month. His former master eventually introduced him to someone who would be his new master, telling Makoto she was the strongest swordsman he had ever known, and that he should become her little sister's disciple. His former master then introduced him to Hinoki Ikeka. Ikeka was his last master, and he trained under her for about 3 years. One day, she showed him a book and asked her what a particular technique was. She looked at it and recognized the technique as indomitable. She explained that it was a lost technique, one she had yet to figure out, and that only Hinoki Reexamination, the founder, had ever mastered it. Makoto couldn't believe what he was hearing. Ikeka then told him that she had nothing left to teach him because he had already mastered the Hinoki one-handed sword style. He asked her how he could become stronger, but she replied that she wasn't sure. She told him his talent was so immense that, despite all the training he had done, he was still like an unbloomed bud. She mentioned that he could even challenge other sword dojos, but it would still be difficult for him to fully bloom in this lifetime. She added that someday, a stronger swordsman might appear before him, and that moment might only happen once in his life. She urged him not to miss such an opportunity. Makoto thanked his master, Hinoki Ikeka, and told her he understood because, at that moment, he knew that opportunity had arisen. Melchius asked Hinoki what Makoto was doing, but Hinoki remained silent, only watching. Kannagi rushed forward, worried about Makoto. Makoto then released an immense power while Hinoki did the same, causing the energy to reach the training grounds of the anti-prophecy. Ikehara felt the surge of power and panicked, asking what it was. Sue, noticing Ikehara's reaction, asked what was wrong. But before he could respond, an explosion occurred, causing Sue to shield his face. Shinomiya and Hinata stopped training when they heard the explosion, and Sue stood stunned in disbelief as he saw the wall had a hole, with Ikehara gone. Meanwhile, inside the mind of 12, confusion was overtaking him. He believed the swordsman before him should no longer be capable of achieving anything, yet deep down, he was certain he would be cut. Hinoki called out to Kannagi and told him that, if people were like flowers, they would only bloom to their true potential for a fleeting moment. Hinoki then asked whether that moment came during the peak of their physical prowess, when they discovered their ultimate move, or perhaps when they reached the truth. He explained that, for Makoto, that moment was happening right now and urged Kannagi to engrave this image deep in his mind. Kannagi was stunned in horror, realizing what Hinoki meant. Makoto exhaled, remembering every important person in his life. He raised his cut hands as if holding a sword, surprising both Kannagi and the man. Makoto then positioned himself, feeling the bloom within his body as he activated Hinoki's one-handed sword style, the Lost Technique. With the indomitable skill, Makoto slashed the man in half. The man knew his defensive darkness should have activated flawlessly, and he realized Makoto had cut his body without any sword or physical contact. Still, the man, unable to believe what had just happened, was cleaved in half. Hinoki praised Makoto for his accomplishment, and Makoto gazed at him proudly. But then, Makoto collapsed, confirming that the sword he had envisioned had materialized. Even as he stood beneath the cloudy sky, he could see something far beyond it. Makoto smiled, thinking he had finally become the swordsman who had reached that level. He closed his eyes, knowing he had been blessed with family, friends, comrades, and subordinates. He reflected on how all of his experiences had made him stronger. Makoto then saw Sue, holding his favorite cat, looking saddened. He apologized to Sue and begged him to forgive his big brother. Despite knowing this was the end for him, Makoto felt satisfied. Suddenly, someone approached him, and Makoto was surprised to see it was Kannagi. Kannagi extended his hand to him, surprising Makoto even more, but he smiled, realizing it was right, his death was not the end. Makoto reached for Kannagi's hand, shaking it with the thought that he could still leave his legacy to the next generation. He thanked Kannagi, but in reality, Kannagi was reaching for him in fear of losing him. Kannagi, feeling the connection to Makoto through his crest of nothingness, tried to reach him but found he couldn't move his body. Suddenly, a bright light appeared in the sky, and Ikehara rushed toward them, calling out Makoto's name in panic. Ikehara grabbed Makoto's arm, but was stunned to see that Makoto had passed away, yet was still smiling. Sue Makoto, at the age of 23, had fallen in the battle against 12. Kannagi, exhausted, collapsed in tears, seeing Makoto playing happily with Sue in his dream. Meanwhile, Ikehara calls out to Makoto, furiously asking him why. Years before, Ikehara had asked Makoto why he chose to become a squad captain, leaving Makoto momentarily confused. Ikehara then threw a water bottle at him, declaring that Makoto was undoubtedly the second strongest in the anti-prophecy, just after himself. He added that if Makoto were to go all out, no one could match him. He questioned whether Makoto didn't think fighting alone might be better. In response, Makoto asked if Ikehara was implying he wasn't suited for teamwork. Makoto then said that, more than anything, his comrades were precious to him, like stars shining brightly. However, he admitted he often struggled to express what this meant to him. Just then, someone called for Makoto from outside. It was Takeru and the others. Proudly, Takeru announced that Kyuzushiro had passed his level 2 swordsmanship test, an assignment that Makoto had set for him. Kyuzushiro told Makoto he wanted him to be the first to know, saying he could now offer his help. Takeru suggested they all go for a meal together. Turning back to Ikehara, Makoto admitted he was right. He cared deeply for his comrades, and even if he were to collapse wounded, he wanted to leave a legacy for them. Meeting them, he added, was the greatest happiness he could imagine. In the present, Ikehara tells Makoto that his comrades witnessed everything, every feat and achievement, and that 2 of them still survive. With tears in his eyes, Ikehara closes them and tells Makoto that he has fulfilled his duty as their leader, something Ikehara himself could not do. "You did well," he says. Nearby, Kannagi lies on the ground, fists clenched in pain as he listens to Ikehara. In his mind's realm, the founders watch over him. Eilerstein comments that the world is growing darker, to which Margit replies that there's nothing surprising in it. Melchias looks on with concern, sensing that Kannagi is blaming himself for this outcome. All of the founders, she reflects, have experienced the loss of comrades, friends, and family. They've endured broken hearts and watched their companions leave, often struggling to heal from the wounds left behind. Inoki approaches Kannagi, but before he can speak, Kannagi declares he no longer wishes to fight, shocking the founders. With tears in his eyes, he tells them his heart feels torn apart. He confesses that if he had allowed the founders to fight from the beginning, no one would have died. To be the strength they need, he only needs to train himself to become their vessel. Inoki tries to explain, but Kannagi interrupts, saying he understands. Yet, even so, the hand that had shaken Makoto's now feels as if it's burning. Looking at Inoki, Kannagi declares that Makoto entrusted him with a legacy, and he won't let it go to waste. Turning to the founders, he proclaims that he now strives to surpass them, not just in skill but in every moment he has left. In the darkness of his inner realm, a light begins to shine from above, growing brighter and brighter until it overwhelms the shadows within him. With the hand he shook with Makoto, he swears to the founders that he will not let anyone die again. Later, a helicopter arrived as Mana and Ikehara held Makoto's body. Silence fell over everyone, with Ikehara lost in thought the entire time. When the helicopter touched down, Ikehara carefully placed Makoto's body in a bag. The pilot reported that everyone had been recovered and they were ready to leave, but Ikehara replied that he would return alone. Mana overheard, while the pilot agreed, advising him to be careful. The helicopter then took off, leaving Ikehara behind, calling someone on his device. Ikehara reported that Makoto had passed away and identified their enemies as the 12 Apostles of the Apocalypse, declaring that paperwork could wait. They would begin their hunt immediately. With that, Ikehara Midori vanished. 1 month later, in the Nagano prefecture at Midake Mountain, Kannagi and Sue were sparring in the river. Sue launched his fists forward, delivering a series of rapid punches, which Kannagi dodged effortlessly. Kannagi countered with a powerful strike, but Sue calmed himself, exhaling deeply to redirect Kannagi's attack, surprising him by changing its direction. Sue then launched a counterattack, but Kannagi intercepted his hand, flipping him upside down, recognizing it as a Kido. However, Sue maneuvered, kicking Kannagi before he could slam him into the water. Blocking with his other hand, Kannagi smiled at Sue, who was surprised. Kannagi then launched a roundhouse kick. Before the strike could land, a voice called out, telling them it was enough. They immediately stepped apart, looking up to see a woman before them, Makoto's former master, Ikeka. The annihilation of Sue's squad had left a deep scar on the anti-prophecy organization. During the funeral for the fallen, Kannagi noticed Sue standing motionless in front of Makoto's picture, lost in thought. After the service, Kannagi found Sue in the hallway, holding a cat and a stack of notebooks. Kannagi called to him, and Sue looked up. Hearing a soft meow, Kannagi asked in surprise if the cat was Oribe. Sue nodded, explaining that he knew his brother had a cat, yet he had realized he knew so little about him. Sue admitted that until he visited Makoto's room, he hadn't known about the little details of his life, what kind of books he read, what clothes he bought, the food he liked, or what he had been thinking. Seeing Makoto's belongings made him realize just how much he hadn't known about his big brother. Kannagi then noticed that the notebooks Sue was holding were diaries. Sue told him that he intended to keep them, as his brother often left messages, aware that each mission might be his last. Sue added that Makoto's daily training routines and missions were detailed within the diaries, with every entry ending in the same way. In Makoto's diary, entries reveal how he often thought about Sue. On January 12th, he noted the colder early morning and late night temperatures, wondering if Sue was managing in the chill. On March 7th, he recorded Sue's success in passing the hunter examination, expressing how proud he felt. By May 17th, he mentioned that Sue was being scouted by the anti-prophecy, which made him worry. On July 19th, he shared that Kashi had brought a delicious watermelon and that he wished he could share some with Sue. Then, on October 1st, he wrote that Sue had been sent on a reconnaissance mission to an unknown disaster zone, but he believed Sue would return safely. Reading these entries, Sue fell to his knees, feeling the weight of his brother's care and realizing that, all along, it had always been about him. Kannagi gently told Sue that Makoto would often talk about him and Oribe, the cat, when they were together. Wiping away tears, Sue told Kannagi that he wanted to grow stronger so his brother wouldn't have to worry about him anymore, even from heaven. The next day, they went to the mountain to meet with Ikeka. When she saw them, she asked who they were. Sue introduced himself and told her that his brother, Makoto, had fallen in battle. Ikeka was briefly taken aback but then replied emotionlessly that she understood. The two young men asked if she would help them become stronger, explaining that was why they had come. Ikeka observed their progress, remarking to Sue that a month ago, Kannagi had been significantly stronger, but Sue's growth was impressive. Sue thanked her. Kannagi, eager for feedback, asked about his own progress. Ikeka dryly asked if he truly had anything left to learn from her, suggesting that perhaps it should be her learning from him. She then used her foot to lift a stick from the ground, tossing one to each of them. Stepping closer, she declared herself their sword and instructed them to come at her. Both replied confidently, yes, as they attacked, each driven by their own motives. Kannagi determined to grow stronger, believing that as the strongest awakened, he could prevent the loss of those he cared about. Meanwhile, in London, England, a man was walking down the street toward a nearby alley. As he stopped midway, someone called to him from behind, asking if he was indeed Quater, one of the 12 apostles of the apocalypse. Quater turned, recognizing his pursuer as Ikehara Midori. Ikehara demanded Quater reveal the location of his allies and their base, warning that if he said anything else, he would be killed. Quater released a dark aura, smirking as he taunted Ikehara, suggesting they take their time and enjoy the fight. Ikehara remained silent. Moments later, in the once quiet alley, a brilliant blue light flashed, followed by a spray of blood. Ikehara emerged unscathed. Addressing his team, Ikehara stated flatly that he had warned Quater he would kill him. He handed a bloody yellow book to a large man nearby, who noted that only 7 apostles remained, casting a glance at the 5 books they had already collected from the 12 apostles. With anger in his eyes, Ikehara instructed the team to prepare to pursue the next target. Meanwhile, within the Anti-Prophecy's top-secret facility, the Hut of Everlasting Vision, the 5 books of the 12 apostles lay before the unit's superintendent, Chief Executive Joe. Joe asked if the books were from Ikehara, to which Shinonome Tenjin, the superintendent's assistant, confirmed with a nod, explaining that these seemed to be prophecy books belonging to the 12 apostles of the apocalypse. The other assistant, Kitamori Shiki, added that it appeared these were parts of a single book that had been disassembled. Joe acknowledged this, remarking that while eliminating the apostles and retrieving the books was manageable, Ikehara was acting independently, clearly scarred by Makoto's death. Shiki asked Joe how they should respond, but Joe advised letting Ikehara act on his own for now, knowing he wouldn't heed their words anyway. Joe added that when Ikehara returned, they would prepare tea for him. Tenjin then raised the topic of the aftermath of Makoto's death, pointing out that the gap left by the fallen Sue squad needed to be addressed. Both Tenjin and Shiki proposed creating a new squad in honor of Makoto and Sue's team. Joe remained silent, contemplating their suggestion. Elsewhere in Tokyo, a Rank 2 prophecy, the rebellion, was underway. Troops of the nameless god of dawn were locked in combat, struggling to hold off formidable enemies. One of the men, straining to keep an opponent at bay, shouted in frustration, noting that just a single enemy was incredibly strong and questioning whether they could push back with ranged attacks. A woman casting magical attacks yelled back that the enemies each had different weaknesses. They then called for their captain, Hibiki Setsuna. Setsuna, the squad's captain, dispatched an enemy effortlessly, commenting with boredom on the ease of the fight. He then asked one of his team members, Akane, if she was ready. Akane confirmed, activating her skill, Trismegistus. Releasing a large volume of liquid in front of her, she instructed her team to stand back. She threw the liquid at the enemies, transforming it into a gas that suffocated several foes. Next, she reverted it to a liquid, dissolving others. She then heated it into a crimson blaze, melting through more enemies. Finally, raising her hand and clenching it tightly, she solidified the liquid into sharp steel, which spiked through the heads of remaining enemies, piercing them to death. Her display left the squad stunned. With the enemies defeated, Akane snapped her fingers, turning the steel back into liquid, and reported to Setsuna that she was finished. Setsuna applauded her performance, marveling at her ability to transform the liquid into poison, suffocating gas, intense heat, and solid steel, executing 4 types of attacks in a single skill. He softly held her face, praising her and lamenting that she was only a temporary member. He then extended an offer, inviting her to join his squad once her training was complete. Akane smiled, thanking him for the offer and replying that she would consider it. Setsuna's team was amazed to see that their captain was serious about recruiting Akane. They whispered among themselves, remarking on Akane's strength, cuteness, and positive attitude, wondering if she would truly join them. Setsuna then told her squad that if Akane joined, things would be much easier for them, making her team panic and exclaim that this was all she really wanted from the beginning. A moment later, Akane called Kannagi and proudly reported that she had completed Lesson 7, mastering control over 3 alchemical states, and asked him to send the next lesson as soon as possible. At the mountain, Kannagi, mid-bite into his sandwich, replied with an enthusiastic okay. Killick laughed with pride, pleased that Akane had finally conquered Lesson 7. Kannagi then asked if Killick could prepare at least 3 more lessons in advance for Akane, to which Killick agreed, telling him not to worry. Kannagi then assured Akane that he'd send the next lesson shortly. Akane thanked him and noted that Hinata was already working on the current lesson. Meanwhile, in Takarazawa City, Saitama Prefecture, Hinata was facing a Rank 2 prophecy threat, an earth-eating divine beast called Sphinx the Glutton. With ease, Hinata delivered a powerful lightning kick, beak's thrust, decapitating the beast. Satisfied with his progress on Lesson 8, he grinned, pleased with his mastery. Todoroki Kuakairu, the captain of the Todoroki squad, shouted praise, inviting Hinata to consider joining his team. The squad members began tossing Hinata into the air in celebration, laughing as he promised to consider the offer. Hinata wondered to himself which squad he should join. Akane then told Kannagi that she was determined not to fall behind and vowed she would outshine them all. Kannagi agreed, adding that Sue was also getting stronger and couldn't just sit around doing nothing while Sue tried to play with Oribe. Kannagi mentioned how happy this made him, and Akane blushed at his enthusiasm. Sue, noticing Oribe looking at him, was shocked and asked the cat why it always seemed to prefer Kannagi. Kannagi laughed, teasing that Oribe was simply scared of Sue's intense training moves, which Akane overheard. She asked what was going on and jokingly inquired if this was turning into a disaster. Akane then asked if Kannagi had heard about the rumor of a new squad. He looked at her, curious, and asked what she meant. As Sue tried to pull Oribe away from Kannagi, Akane explained that a new squad was being formed to fill the gap left by the fallen Sue squad. She added that the captain of the new squad would likely be chosen based on achievement. Kannagi nodded thoughtfully, wondering who the new captain would be, while Sue swung a stick behind him in frustration. Akane went on to say that the question wasn't about who would become the captain, revealing that she had already discussed the matter with Hinata. Then, she asked Kannagi what he thought about leading a squad himself. Kannagi initially agreed, thinking she was just asking for his opinion. But as her words sank in, he panicked, asking her what she meant and why anyone would want him as squad captain. Akane paused before explaining to Kannagi that within the anti-prophecy, there existed a deep desire to find someone capable of eliminating all prophecies, a goal she, too, longed for. To achieve this, the squad was looking for a strong-willed leader, and she believed he had the qualities to lead a newly formed team. Kannagi was surprised to hear this from her, but before he could respond, Setsuna called Akane sweetly, reminding her that they needed to head back. Akane told Kannagi to think about it and that they'd talk later, hanging up before he could stop her, leaving him frustrated. A short while later, Kannagi sat on a large rock in the middle of the river, lost in thought. Nearby, Ikika asked Sue if he knew what Kannagi was doing. Sue replied that Kannagi was considering becoming the captain of a new squad. Ikika responded that if Kannagi wanted the role, he was certainly capable, and Sue agreed that Kannagi would be an excellent fit. Ikika stared thoughtfully at Kannagi, a bit puzzled. Inside Kanaga's mind, Melchias addressed the founders, asking if any of them had advice for him, but they each responded with uncertainty. Eilerson admitted she wasn't sure how to advise him. Shimer noted that they had dedicated their lives to mastering their skills, not leadership, and Wantak commented that they had little experience with command. Hinoki, irritated, added that none of them really understood. Melchias chided them as useless teachers, provoking an outburst from Hinoki, who pointed out that she was part of this group, too. Hinoki then turned to Rion, the founder of military strategy, asking if he had any guidance. Rion replied that it wasn't yet his time to speak, hinting that someone else was already present to guide Kannagi, confusing Hinoki. Just then, a stick flew through the air, piercing the stone Kannagi was sitting on. Ikika stepped onto the river, calling out to him and scolding him for wasting time. She urged him to train with her instead, ordering him to use his flash step. He stammered a reply before activating the skill, leaping off the stone and landing on the river's surface. He then used his ripple step to keep himself afloat. Ikika encouraged him to continue without hesitation, commenting on how impressive his current level was, far beyond that of a typical awakened in under 6 months. Kannagi laughed awkwardly, remembering how Hinoki had trained him relentlessly, even forcing him to practice in his sleep. Suddenly, he was jolted back to the present as Ikika released a powerful slash. He barely ducked in time, and the slash cleaved through the stone he had been sitting on moments before. Sue watched in shock, while Oribe, his cat, hissed in frustration. Ikika firmly told Kannagi that she didn't mind if his thoughts wandered, but she would force him to focus if needed. Startled, Kannagi quickly readied himself. Hinoki, observing from within, asked Rion if he had been referring to Ikika as the qualified person to guide Kannagi. Melchias remarked that Ikika was impressively powerful for a modern awakened, adding that she expected nothing less from a descendant of Hinoki. But Hinoki clarified that Ikika wasn't his descendant, likely she had inherited her strength from his brother. Even so, he acknowledged Ikika as a worthy successor, noting her role in training Sue Makoto. Ikika activated her Hinoki one-handed sword style and attacked Kannagi with the Skyfall technique. Fortunately, Kannagi managed to dodge each slash that pursued him, which impressed Hinoki, watching from within as he tried to understand this new technique. Kannagi noticed that Ikika was going all out and then saw her unleash the Purgatory sword technique. The slashes came dangerously close, causing a loud explosion upon impact. Hinoki watched with excitement, realizing that Ikika had created a new technique based on his own passed down knowledge, something entirely original. After her barrage of attacks, Ikika landed on the shattered remains of the stone she had destroyed. She praised Kannagi for his agility, remarking that he had dodged well, especially considering he'd never seen this technique before. She also observed that his Hinoki one-handed sword style closely resembled that of the founder, which surprised him. She went on, guessing that his real worry was whether he could be as strong as Makoto. Stunned, Kannagi remembered questioning if he could ever live up to Makoto's legacy. Sue, observing nearby, realized that Kannagi had been silently struggling with this doubt all along. He admired Makoto deeply as a captain, but he wasn't sure if he could ever truly fill those shoes. Ikika broke his thoughts by telling him he didn't have to be like Makoto, leaving him puzzled. She shouted for him to pay attention, then demonstrated the Hinoki one-handed sword style, Tengu dance in front of him. She explained that this technique was developed by the previous master using the founder's knowledge. While it might not match the raw power of the founder's original techniques, each generation had gradually refined it, bringing them closer and closer over time. As the Tengu dance faded, Ikika admitted she didn't know exactly what kind of captain Makoto was, but the fact that they were all talking about him now meant he must have been a great one. She added that while it might not have been that way in the beginning, with perseverance, Kannagi could reach that level too. She then asked him pointedly if he agreed with her, saying that what he needed to focus on wasn't becoming someone like Makoto but rather recognizing what Makoto had entrusted him with. At that, Kannagi remembered how Makoto had once reached out to shake his hand with a smile, realizing that what he had been given was a chance to shape the future. Ikika praised him for understanding, then loudly declared that she would personally train him for that future. With determination, Kannagi stepped forward, launching his wooden sword toward hers, unleashing a powerful blast around them. 2 weeks later, at the anti-prophecy headquarters, Setsuna reviewed a list on the tablet that Todoroki Kuwakairu held as he spoke with Tenjin over the phone. Kuwakairu asked if this was the candidate list for the new squad captain, to which Tenjin confirmed, explaining that the list had been approved by Superintendent Joe, though it included some surprising names, Kannagi being one of them, recommended by Ikika herself. Outside the anti-prophecy headquarters, a woman reported to her boss that she had infiltrated the facility without issue, and noted that the examination for the new squad captain would start in 3 days. She assured her boss to wait patiently. One of the 12 apostles of the apocalypse, Eva, then spoke confidently to her boss, declaring that the new squad leader of the anti-prophecy would soon be under her control. Eva, one of the 12 apostles of the apocalypse, possessed a skill called Heavenly Demon, allowing her to replace the existence of anyone she had previously killed. Her goal was to become captain of the newly formed anti-prophecy squad and sabotage the organization from within. Eva was well aware that Ikehara was currently on a relentless hunt, eliminating the 12 apostles one by one. More than half had already fallen. Knowing she couldn't defeat the monstrous Ikehara on her own, Eva decided that sabotage from within was their best option, convinced that everything she did was to fulfill the prophecy. 3 days later, at the anti-prophecy training field, Tenjin called out to the applicants vying for the squad captain position, ordering them to line up. He announced the start of the selection examination for the new squad captain, explaining that the test would consist of 4 stages. Only 4 applicants would advance to the final stage, and the exam would be point-based. First place in each stage would earn 3 points, second place 2 points, and third place 1 point. At the end, the candidate with the highest score would be appointed captain. Tenjin then emphasized that Superintendent Joe was present to observe their performances, urging them to give everything they had. The candidates replied with a resounding yes. Kannagi observed the lineup of applicants, feeling their intense gazes directed at him. There were 8 candidates in total. Koki Haruki from the Yagurama squad eyed Kannagi, asking if he was the odd one that Ikehara brought in, wondering aloud what others thought about him. Akihina Seishiro from the Yorizuya squad scoffed, saying that aiming to become a captain just 2 months after joining was laughable. Sano Kuromo from the Yushima squad remarked that Kannagi was still a trainee, asking Hisagi Soa from the Makabe squad if that didn't make him impressive. Isagi, however, brushed her off, irritated by all the chatter and wondering who Kannagi really was. Meanwhile, Sakazaki Isuke from the Tsuruzaki squad noted with interest that Kannagi was one of the 5 survivors from the rank 1 prophecy and had been personally recommended by Hinoki Ikika. Shikami-en from the Todoroki squad, however, was annoyed, recalling how Kannagi had even been teaching some of his friends. Juryu Kanem from the Hibiki squad figured out that Kannagi was Aken's teacher and curiously wondered if Kannagi was as charming as he seemed. Among these 8 candidates, one was actually Eva, one of the 12 apostles in disguise. Kannagi noticed that each applicant was accompanied by their squad captain. Except him, Ikika was notably absent. He knew why, though. She had overslept and warned him that if he failed before she arrived, she'd throw him into a volcano. He didn't doubt her threat. When Ikika made such statements, she tended to follow through, and she enjoyed it. Though he still didn't know what the first test would entail, he resolved not to be eliminated before she showed up. Suddenly, Tenjin's shout announced the start of the test, catching Kannagi off guard. Meanwhile, Sue was sprinting down the mountain at full speed with Ikika riding behind him, holding Oribe the cat. He asked her if this was really part of his training, but she simply ordered him to go faster. In the distance, Sue caught sight of a bright blue light, which surprised him. Ikika urged him to hurry, warning that if they didn't get there soon, the test would end, and she meant Kanagi's victory. At the training field, Tenjin conducted the first test, a mana measurement. He was stunned as an enormous surge of mana radiated from the device, coming from Kannagi. Shocked, Tenjin announced that Kannagi had taken first place, while Kannagi, realizing he had broken the device, panicked and apologized to everyone. Seishiro, who had placed 5th, couldn't believe the device had been destroyed, while Isuke, who was in 3rd place, smirked, remarking that Kannagi was certainly an irregular. Kuromo, who held 2nd place, wondered if the device was defective, but Isuke explained that sometimes anomalies occurred when a genius with extraordinary physical or magical talent was involved. He suggested that Kanagi's specialty was likely in magic. Looking at En, Isuke noted that Kannagi seemed to be in the same category as him. En, in 7th place, replied that he understood. In the standings after the first test, Kannagi ranked 1st, followed by Kuromo in 2nd and Isuke in 3rd. They then moved on to the 2nd test, hand-to-hand combat. Tenjin explained that the candidates would face off against one another, with victory going to the first to score 2 points. Just as Tenjin was about to announce the first matchup, En raised his hand, interrupting him, and challenged Kannagi directly. Shikami En was renowned as the strongest in hand-to-hand combat among the regular members, considered an irregular due to his formidable skills. As a toddler, En had been caught in a dimensional rift that unleashed monsters. When the monsters attacked his mother, his innate talent had awakened, allowing him to kill the creatures and save her. Even while still in his baby carriage, En had slain all the monsters, earning legendary status from a young age. Setsuna turned to Todoroki Kukairu, commenting that it seemed unfair to have someone of En's caliber participate. Kukairu, unbothered, responded that it was natural to recommend their strongest member. He proudly explained that while En lacked magical talent, his physical abilities were extraordinary even for an awakened. Since joining the squad, En had trained intensely, and Kukairu was confident that no one there could rival him in hand-to-hand combat. Flexing his massive muscles, Kukairu grinned while Setsuna, visibly uncomfortable, sighed, telling him to stop posing. She acknowledged to herself that En's combat skills were impressive, predicting that the match would likely end quickly. As the match began, En approached Kannagi, asking if he had indeed given lessons to Hinata. Momentarily confused, Kannagi remembered that his training with the founders had mainly focused on combat. He replied modestly, saying he merely passed on advice and felt more like a messenger. En, visibly irritated, accused Kannagi of presumption, saying there were those who would proclaim themselves geniuses and claim credit for raising someone like Hinata, a natural talent who would rise regardless. Kannagi agreed readily, surprising En with his sincerity. Smiling, Kannagi added that he had thought the same all along. En, slightly taken aback, muttered that Kannagi was an odd one. With that, En extended his fingernails into sharp claws and activated his violent bite technique, declaring that they should start. He sunk his foot into the ground and charged at Kannagi with incredible speed. Kannagi was taken aback by En's speed and narrowly ducked to avoid his grab, the force of which shattered the ground behind him, shocking the other candidates. Kukairu cheered enthusiastically, urging En to go all out. En continued his assault, launching repeated strikes at Kannagi, who deftly dodged each one without moving from his spot. Finally, Kannagi seized En's arm, activating his kudo stance, sleeve throw. He skillfully redirected En's momentum, slamming him forcefully into the ground and shattering the area around them. The audience gasped in astonishment. As Kannagi lifted En back up, he complimented him, marveling at the sheer power in his strikes even when merely redirected. He admitted that En was incredibly strong, which only served to irritate En more, who muttered angrily, wondering if Kannagi was being sarcastic. En forcefully pulled his hand free and steadied himself, quickly recovering. Haruki was astonished by En's resilience, while Kaname wondered aloud why neither fighter seemed injured despite the shattered terrain. Typing rapidly on his laptop, Isuke explained that En's physical boost was highly irregular, and that his body's durability was far beyond that of a normal awakened. En then charged forward at Kannagi once more, realizing he couldn't win against En through counterattacks alone. Kannagi decided to try out a technique he'd just learned. Mimicking Eilerson's stance, he launched at En with the light kick technique, enhancing it with Wantak's penetration, creating the luminance kick. The powerful strike threw En to the ground, bouncing him across the terrain due to its intensity, shocking each of the candidates. En collapsed to the ground, severely injured. Tenjin called an end to the fight, announcing Kannagi as the winner, awarding him 2 points. Inside Kannagi's mental realm, One-Tak and Eilerson watched proudly. Soa excitedly remarked that Kannagi had overpowered En with sheer physical strength, asking Aisuke if he hadn't just claimed Kannagi's strength was limited to mana. Aisuke simply replied, "Understood," as he continued typing on his laptop. Caught off guard by Kannagi's unexpectedly high combat ability, he logged his observations, realizing that if left unchecked, Kannagi might prove an obstacle. A few minutes later, En regained consciousness and saw Kannagi's back as he healed his wounds. En groaned in pain, and Kannagi warned him to stay still while he continued healing him, recalling lessons from Valentine, the god of medicine. However, En dismissed his help, scoffing that Kannagi was an irregular in both mana and physical abilities, and now he could heal, too. En asked if there was anything Kannagi couldn't do, but Kannagi stayed silent, a faint smile masking his pain, knowing there were things he could never accomplish, regardless of his skills. Finally, he told En he should be able to stand now. En, still baffled, demanded to know just who Kannagi was. Suddenly, a loud explosion echoed in the distance. En asked what was going on, and Kannagi replied that it was the final match of the hand-to-hand combat exam. En, shocked, asked how long he'd been unconscious. Kannagi told him it had been about 5 minutes and explained that after their fight, everyone had been paired up to fight simultaneously. The second match had been Haruki vs Kaname, and the third Kuromo vs Seishiro, both of which had ended quickly. The last match still ongoing was between Aisuke and Soa. On the battlefield, Soa launched an attack at Aisuke, taunting him. She accused him of thinking highly of himself due to his stable, high-level abilities, but said that without special talents, he was ultimately replaceable. She added that lacking skill was an unfit quality for a captain. Aisuke responded calmly, admitting he didn't like standing out and that no amount of talent alone could create a true genius. He argued that even an ordinary person in the captain's role would only face death unless they had the adaptability necessary to improve every squad member's chances of survival, even by just 1%. And that, he said, was the role he aspired to fill. Recalling the fall of Suu's squad, Aisuke glanced at Kannagi and muttered that, to avoid meeting the same fate as Captain Makoto's team, they needed to take every precaution. En, overhearing him, shouted at Aisuke to watch his words, calling him shitty glasses and telling him he'd crossed the line. Kannagi quietly thanked En for the defense. Soa, determined, activated her Taijutsu and attacked Aisuke with a disciplined chain sword technique. Though he blocked most of her strikes, one strong hit managed to knock him down, dragging him across the ground. As she prepared to strike again, he raised his hand and announced his surrender. Tenjin called an end to the match, declaring Soa the winner, leaving her stunned. Furious, she charged at Aisuke, accusing him of holding back. Kuromo quickly held her back, trying to calm her down, while Aisuke stood up, remarking coolly that he wasn't accustomed to fighting barbaric women and that he had intended to conserve his energy for the upcoming tests. This only infuriated Soa more. Aisuke walked off, thinking to himself that while he could have defeated Soa if he'd wanted, he didn't want to reveal his true abilities to Kannagi just yet. With the second stage of the exam complete, the rankings showed Kannagi still in first place. Tenjin commended everyone on their performance, announcing a 30-minute break before the third test. He reminded them that the 4 lowest-ranking candidates would be eliminated in the next stage, urging them to stay sharp. Kannagi glanced around, noticing that Ikika and Sue were still nowhere to be seen, wondering if they'd somehow lost their way. Meanwhile, at the anti-prophecy headquarters, Sue was catching his breath, exhausted, as he told Ikika they'd finally arrived. She praised him for his efforts, and he looked around, confused, asking why they were in the courtyard of headquarters instead of the exam venue. Ikika walked toward a cluster of nearby trees, explaining that someone had recently died there. Shocked, Sue followed her as she pointed out the faint residue of an aura lingering in the air, expertly concealed. She explained that it appeared an awakened individual had been killed by a powerful monster. Sue, struggling to believe it, asked how anyone could infiltrate the anti-prophecy headquarters, a place meant to be entirely secure. Ikika responded that the 12 apostles knew of their existence, so it wasn't surprising they'd found the headquarters. Though reluctant to accept this, Sue asked what their goal might be. Ikika told him they should focus on reaching the test venue, adding that the victim was likely at the level of a squad captain, yet there had been no reports of a death. She remarked with a hint of intrigue that things were getting interesting, realizing that Ikahara wasn't the only one seeking revenge for Makoto's death.